What if the life you keep trying to fix isn't broken at all? Maya spent years believing freedom was something she had to earn. She thought she needed more money, more confidence, more success, a better body, a perfect relationship, and enough emotional strength to make herself impossible to hurt. She became an expert at appearing capable while privately carrying fear, shame, exhaustion, and a quiet suspicion that she was somehow falling behind. Then one question stopped her. If I were no longer trying to prove anything, how would I live? The answer changed everything. She began looking at her life differently. Money was no longer a measure of her worth. It became a tool for creating choices. Boundaries were no longer walls, they became a language of self-respect. Intimacy was no longer performance, it became presence, honesty, curiosity, and trust. Healing was no longer about erasing the past. It was about becoming someone who could face the future, without abandoning herself. But freedom came with a price Maya had never expected. She had to stop waiting for certainty. She had to learn that a higher salary could cost her time, that love could exist without control, that saying no could disappoint people without making her selfish, and that financial security was not about predicting the future, but preparing for uncertainty. She discovered that self-trust was not something you suddenly found inside yourself. It was built. One promise kept. 1 boundary honored. 1 difficult conversation survived. $1 saved. 1 honest decision at a time. And then life tested everything she had learned. A career opportunity, a financial setback, a painful memory, a relationship that demanded deeper honesty, a dream that required her to risk failure. Maya finally understood the truth she had been searching for. Freedom is not the moment when nothing can hurt you. Freedom is becoming someone who can be hurt, lose, change, and begin again without abandoning yourself. And that journey was only beginning. There are wounds that announce themselves loudly, and there are wounds that learn to whisper. The loud ones are easier to recognize. They interrupt sleep, change the way a person moves through the world, and demand attention. The quieter wounds are different. They can hide inside ordinary routines, inside successful careers, inside marriages that look happy from the outside, and even inside the person who insists that everything is fine. They may appear as discomfort when someone gets too close, anxiety when affection becomes intense, difficulty expressing a need, an inability to trust one's own body, shame about desire, fear of rejection, or a persistent feeling that something inside has gone missing. For years, Maya believed her problem was that she was simply too complicated. She did not know that what she called complication was often a protective response to experiences she had never learned how to understand. She had become very good at functioning. She woke early, answered messages, completed her work, paid her bills, exercised when she had time, remembered birthdays, smiled at colleagues, and maintained the appearance of someone who had her life under control. People admired her discipline. Some even told her that she seemed unusually strong. She accepted the compliment because she did not know what else to do with it. Strength, as she understood it then, meant continuing without asking too many questions. It meant getting through difficult days. It meant not burdening other people with complicated emotions. It meant keeping certain memories locked away so securely that eventually she could pretend the locked door had never existed. Then, one evening, she found herself sitting alone in her car outside her apartment, unable to make herself walk upstairs. Nothing dramatic had happened that day. There had been no argument, no crisis, no terrible news. She had simply returned from dinner with someone she cared about, and during the evening, he had reached for her hand. The gesture was gentle. It was respectful. It was exactly the kind of affection she had once told herself she wanted. Yet when his fingers touched hers, her body tightened before her mind could explain why. Her breathing became shallow. She pulled her hand away almost automatically, and then immediately felt guilty. She had spent the rest of dinner pretending nothing had happened. Now, she sat in the dark car wondering why something so small could produce such a large reaction. She hated the question because she already knew the Answer she would probably give herself. Something is wrong with me. That sentence had followed her for years. Something is wrong with me. She had used it whenever she struggled to trust someone. She had used it whenever she felt uncomfortable with affection. She had used it whenever she compared herself with friends who seemed more relaxed in relationships. She had used it whenever her body responded with tension even though her mind believed she was safe. She had used it whenever she wanted closeness and simultaneously wanted to escape it. But that night, sitting alone in the car, another thought appeared. What if something is not wrong with me? What if something happened to me? The distinction was small. Its consequences were enormous. She sat with it for several minutes. For the first time, she considered that her reactions might not be evidence of failure. They might be messages. Her body might not be sabotaging her. It might be trying, in the only way it knew, to protect her from something it had learned to fear. She did not suddenly remember everything. Healing rarely arrives as a perfectly organized revelation. Memory, emotion, sensation, and meaning do not always appear in neat chronological order. Sometimes the body remembers before the conscious mind has a story. Sometimes a smell, a tone of voice, a particular gesture, or a certain situation creates a reaction that seems disproportionate to the present moment. The person may know intellectually that they are safe while another part of them remains unconvinced. Maya began to understand that healing would not be a battle against her own body. It would require learning to listen to it. That was a frightening idea she had spent years trying to override. Herself, ignore the tension. Don't make a big deal out of it. Be normal. Don't disappoint anyone. Just relax. Try harder. Stop thinking. Be grateful. Move on. The commands had been endless. None had helped. So she began with something smaller. She stopped telling herself to relax. Instead, when she noticed tension, she simply said, "I'm noticing tension." That was all. No judgment. No demand that it disappear. No accusation. Just recognition. The first time she tried it, nothing dramatic happened. Her shoulders remained tight. Her heartbeat remained fast. She still wanted to leave the room, but she noticed something important. She had created a tiny space between the sensation and the story she normally attached to it. Before, tension meant something is wrong with me. Now it meant, my body is experiencing tension. Those statements were not the same. One attacked her identity, the other described an experience. That distinction became the beginning of her recovery. Healing, she discovered, often begins with language. The words we use toward ourselves can either reinforce shame or create room for curiosity. If someone says, "I am broken," the statement sounds permanent. If they say, "I am experiencing pain," the experience becomes something that can be explored. If they say, "I am incapable of intimacy," the door seems closed. If they say, "I am having difficulty feeling safe in intimacy," the possibility of change remains. She began writing these differences in a notebook. I am broken became I am hurting. I am difficult became I have learned protective patterns. I can't trust anyone became trust is difficult for me right now. My body is failing me became my body is trying to communicate something. I should be over this became I am allowed to heal at my own pace. She did not believe the new statements immediately. That was not the point. The point was to stop feeding herself the same conclusions that had kept her trapped. Recovery does not begin when you finally believe everything will be easy. It begins when you stop treating yourself as the enemy. That became the first principle she carried forward. She also learned that healing could not be forced. There is a peculiar impatience that can appear when someone finally decides they want to change. They want a plan. They want milestones. They want to know how long it will take. They want certainty that if they complete the steps correctly, the pain will disappear. Maya understood that desire. She had always been a planner. If something could be measured, she could manage it. She could organize money. She could organize work. She could organize appointments. She could organize travel. But healing was not a spreadsheet. Some days she felt courageous. Other days, she felt fragile. Sometimes, a conversation helped. Sometimes the same conversation left her emotionally exhausted. Sometimes she could stay present with difficult sensations. Sometimes she could not. The temptation was to interpret inconsistency as failure. Then, she learned another principle. Progress is not the absence of difficult days. Progress is becoming less afraid of having them. That idea changed her expectations. She no longer demanded that every day prove she was healed. Instead, she began noticing small changes. She could say when something made her uncomfortable. She could pause before automatically agreeing. She could tell someone, "I need to slow down." She could leave a conversation that felt disrespectful. She could ask questions instead of assuming she knew what someone wanted. She could distinguish affection from obligation. These changes seemed small to other people. To Maya, they were enormous. For much of her life, she had believed that being a good person meant being easy to be around. She said yes quickly. She avoided disappointing people. She apologized when someone else crossed a boundary. She often sensed other people's needs before they expressed them and then treated those needs as responsibilities. She had confused kindness with self-trasure. The realization was painful, because once you notice that you have been abandoning yourself to keep other people comfortable, you cannot easily return to the old arrangement. One afternoon, a friend asked her to attend an event. Maya did not want to go. Normally she would have said yes. This time she paused. "I'm tired," she said. "I think I need to stay home." Her friend sounded disappointed. "Oh, okay." The old guilt arrived immediately. "Maybe I should go. Maybe she think I'm selfish. Maybe I should explain. Maybe I can change my mind." Maya felt the impulse to rescue the other person's feelings. Instead, she breathed. She had not insulted anyone. She had not broken a promise. She had simply listened to herself. The guilt remained. She stayed home anyway. That night, she realized something profound. A boundary can feel uncomfortable even when it is healthy. Discomfort is not proof that you have done something wrong. For someone accustomed to pleasing others, saying no can initially feel like aggression. It is not. A boundary is information. It says, "This is where I stop. This is what I can offer. This is what I cannot offer. This is what I need in order to participate willingly." The more Maya practiced, the less frightening boundaries became. She also began to understand that boundaries were essential to healthy intimacy. Genuine closeness cannot be built on silent obligation. If one person feels unable to say no, then the other person's yes becomes less meaningful. Choice is part of intimacy. Freedom is part of trust. She started using a sentence that felt revolutionary in its simplicity. "Let me think about that." She used it when someone asked for her time. She used it when she felt pressured. She used it when she was unsure. She used it when she needed to understand her own response before giving someone else an answer. The sentence gave her something she had rarely allowed herself before. Time between request and response. Time between sensation and reaction. Time between fear and decision. Time created space. And space created choice. One of the first forms of freedom is the freedom to pause. Maya began noticing how often people were pressured to respond instantly. Messages demanded immediate replies. Social expectations rewarded constant availability. Advertising encouraged immediate purchases. Anger demanded immediate retaliation. Anxiety demanded immediate reassurance. She started experimenting with pauses everywhere. When she wanted to buy something, she waited. When she wanted to send an angry message, she waited. When she felt pressure to agree, she waited. When she wanted to interpret someone's behavior, she waited. The pauses changed her financial life. 2. She discovered that some of her spending had been emotional, rather than practical. A difficult day at work could produce an online shopping spree. Loneliness could lead to expensive dinners she did not actually want. Comparison could make her feel that she needed newer clothes, better furniture, or more impressive experiences. The purchase created a brief sensation of control. Then, the feeling faded. She had thought financial discipline required greater willpower. Now she wondered whether it required greater emotional awareness. Before purchasing something unnecessary, she began asking, "What am I hoping this will make me feel?" Sometimes the answer was excitement. Sometimes comfort. Sometimes importance. Sometimes distraction. Sometimes belonging. The question did not mean she stopped spending. It meant she started choosing. That difference mattered. She created a simple financial philosophy for herself. First, protect the foundation. Maintain an emergency reserve. Manage expensive debt responsibly, and make sure essential risks are covered. Second, build the future. Invest consistently according to a long-term plan she understood. Third, protect freedom. Avoid lifestyle commitments that required her to remain in work she hated simply to keep paying for things she did not truly value. Fourth, use money to support meaning. Spend on health, education, relationships, experiences, generosity, and things that genuinely improved her life. Financial freedom is not the ability to buy everything you want. It is the ability to make important decisions without money controlling every choice. The principle resonated with her because healing and financial freedom began to look surprisingly similar. Both required awareness. Both required boundaries. Both required the ability to tolerate short-term discomfort in service of long-term well-being. Both required distinguishing genuine needs from automatic reactions. And both required patience. She began seeing financial security as emotional breathing room. If she had savings, she did not have to remain in every situation. If she managed her expenses, she had more options. If she avoided unnecessary debt, she reduced the number of decisions dictated by fear. Money could not heal emotional wounds, but financial instability could make emotional recovery harder. Stress affects sleep. Sleep affects emotional regulation. Emotional distress affects decision-making. Poor decisions can create financial problems. Financial problems create more stress. The cycle can reinforce itself. Maya wanted to break that cycle. Not by becoming obsessed with wealth. By building enough stability that money became a tool rather than a constant emergency. She automated part of her income toward savings and long-term investments. She tracked her spending without shaming herself when she overspent. She investigated instead of attacking herself. What happened? What was I feeling? What triggered the purchase? What can I change next time? This was the same approach she used in emotional healing. Observation before judgment, understanding before correction. She began to see that self-compassion did not mean avoiding responsibility. It meant taking responsibility without cruelty. If she made a financial mistake, she corrected it. If she crossed her own boundary, she noticed. If she hurt someone, she apologized. If she became frightened, she listened. Compassion and accountability could exist together. That realization became important when Maya entered a new relationship. The man she met was patient, thoughtful, and respectful. At first, his kindness frightened her more than obvious mistreatment would have. She was accustomed to interpreting intensity as connection. She had learned to associate unpredictability with excitement. Now, she encountered steadiness. He asked before assuming. He listened when she spoke. When she said she needed space, he did not punish her for it. When she changed her mind, he did not mock her. When she was uncomfortable, he slowed down. The absence of pressure was unfamiliar. One evening, Maya told him something she had never been able to say easily. Sometimes when someone is kind to me, I don't know what to do with it. He looked at her. What do you mean? I've spent so much time expecting something to go wrong that when nothing goes wrong, I become suspicious. He did not tell her she was being irrational. He did not promise that nothing would ever hurt her. He simply said, "We can go slowly." Those words moved her. We can go slowly. Healing needed that sentence. So did intimacy. So did trust. She began learning that trust was not a switch that turned from Often on dot, it was more like a path built from repeated experiences. A person says what they mean dot, then they do what they say. A boundary is expressed. Then, it is respected. A vulnerability is shared. Then, it is treated with care. A disagreement happens. Then repair becomes possible. Over time, the nervous system gathers evidence. Maybe this person is safe. Maybe I can speak. Maybe I can say no. Maybe I can change my mind. Maybe I can be seen without being punished. Trust grows through evidence. Trust is rarely created by promises alone. It is built by consistent experiences of safety. Maya did not expect herself to trust immediately. She did not demand that her body behave differently simply because her mind had identified a good person. She gave herself permission to learn. Slowly. Sometimes she became anxious. Sometimes she pulled away. When she did, she tried to explain rather than disappear. I'm overwhelmed. I need a moment. I want to stay connected, but I need to slow down. Her partner listened. That response mattered. Not because he was responsible for healing her. He wasn't. Partner can support healing. A partner cannot do another person's healing for them. Maya needed her own work, her own choices, her own professional support, her own boundaries, and her own growing relationship with herself. That distinction protected the relationship from becoming a rescue story. She did not want to be rescued. She wanted to become capable of choosing. And she did not want him to become responsible for making her feel safe every second. She wanted them to build safety together while each remained responsible for their own inner work. That was a different kind of intimacy. Less dramatic. More sustainable. There were evenings when they simply talked. There were evenings when they laughed. There were evenings when they sat together without speaking. And there were evenings when nothing felt right, and they respected that too. Maya began discovering that intimacy did not need to be measured by intensity. Sometimes intimacy was a hand held during a difficult conversation. Sometimes it was being able to say, "Not tonight," without fear. Sometimes it was laughing about something ridiculous. Sometimes it was telling the truth about insecurity. Sometimes it was allowing silence. Sometimes it was asking, "How are you really doing?" Sometimes it was listening to the answer. The more she understood this, the less she felt pressured to perform closeness. Performance had been one of her oldest defenses. She knew how to appear fine. She knew how to smile. She knew how to say the appropriate thing. She knew how to make other people comfortable. But healing required something different: authenticity. Authenticity did not mean telling everyone everything. It meant making the inside and outside of your life less contradictory. If she was uncomfortable, she could say so. If she needed time, she could ask. If she wanted affection, she could express it. If she did not want something, she could decline. If she was uncertain, she could admit uncertainty. That honesty was sometimes frightening, but it was also freeing. Authenticity is not saying everything you think. It is refusing to betray what you know to be true about yourself. Maya began to understand that healing did not mean returning to who she would have been without painful experiences. There was no untouched version of herself waiting somewhere in the past. Healing meant becoming someone who could carry her history without allowing it to dictate every future choice. The past could explain a pattern without becoming a life sentence. That distinction gave her hope. She could honor what happened without living there. She could acknowledge pain without making pain her identity. She could remember without constantly reliving. She could protect herself without closing herself. She could be cautious without becoming unreachable. She could love without abandoning herself. She could earn without worshiping money. She could spend without using consumption to regulate every emotion. She could build wealth without making wealth the measure of her worth. She could want intimacy without making another person responsible for completing her. She could be alone without believing she was unwanted. These were not conclusions she reached in a single afternoon. They were practices. And practice changed her. Slowly. Sometimes painfully, often invisibly. She began keeping a record of moments when she chose differently. Today I paused. Today I said no. Today I asked for what I needed. Today I noticed fear without obeying it. Today I saved instead of spending. Today I told the truth. Today I accepted affection without immediately questioning it. Today I rested without earning it first. The list became evidence. Not evidence that she was perfect. Evidence that change was possible. One evening, she read the list from beginning to end. She realized something that made her cry. The person she had been waiting for someone else to approve of had already begun to emerge. She was becoming someone she could trust. And perhaps that was the deepest form of healing. Before she could fully trust another person, she needed to learn that she would not abandon herself. If something felt wrong, she would listen. If someone crossed a boundary, she would respond. If she made a mistake, she would repair it. If fear appeared, she would not automatically shame herself. If she needed help, she would ask. If life became difficult, she would seek support rather than disappearing into silence. She would remain present, not perfectly, but more often. The lesson seems simple. Stay with yourself. Stay when you are uncomfortable. Stay when you are afraid. Stay when you are uncertain. Stay when old shame appears. Stay long enough to ask what is actually happening. But staying did not mean tolerating harm. That distinction was essential. Sometimes staying with yourself meant leaving a situation. Sometimes self-compassion meant ending a relationship. Sometimes healing required distance. Sometimes the most loving decision was a boundary. Maya learned that compassion without boundaries can become self-neglect. Boundaries without compassion can become walls. She wanted neither. She wanted discernment, the ability to say, I can care about you and still say no. I can understand your pain and still protect myself. I can forgive you and still choose distance. I can love someone and recognize that the relationship is unhealthy. I can accept my past without repeating it. This was not coldness. It was maturity. As months became years, Maya noticed that her relationship with her own body was changing too. For years, she had treated her body an object she was supposed to manage, improve it, hide it, evaluate it, compare it, control it. Now she tried something more radical. She began treating her body as a living partner, a source of information, a part of herself deserving respect. She noticed hunger before reaching exhaustion. She rested before collapse. She moved because movement felt good rather than because she needed punishment. She paid attention to tension. She noticed fatigue. She learned to distinguish discomfort from danger. She stopped demanding that her body always look the same. Bodies change. They age. They respond to stress. They recover. They carry scars. They become stronger. They become tired. They are not machines. And they are certainly not moral report cards. Your body does not need to earn your respect by looking a certain way. The statement released something in her. She began seeing how much suffering came from fighting ordinary human change. Aging was not failure. Fatigue was not weakness. Emotion was not incompetence. Need was not shameful. Vulnerability was not defeat. And asking for help was not surrender. These ideas slowly changed the architecture of her life. Her work became more intentional. Her finances became more stable. Her relationship became more honest. Her boundaries became clearer. Her relationship with her body became kinder. But perhaps the greatest change was invisible. She no longer felt the same urgency to become someone else. She could grow without hating who she was. That was a new kind of motivation. Not fear. Not shame. Not comparison. Care. She wanted to become healthier because she cared about her future self. She wanted financial security because she cared about her freedom. She wanted stronger relationships because she cared about connection. She wanted emotional healing because she cared about being present. She wanted to learn because curiosity had returned. And when motivation came from care, discipline felt different. It was still difficult, but it was no longer punishment. Discipline becomes easier to sustain when it is an expression of self-respect rather than self-rejection. Maya carried that principle into her financial life. Saving became an act of care for tomorrow. Investing became a vote for future independence. Avoiding unnecessary debt became protection against future pressure. Building skills became an investment in adaptability. Giving became a reminder that wealth was not meaningful only when it accumulated. She did not chase financial perfection. She built resilience. She understood that circumstances could change. Income could fall. Markets could decline. Unexpected expenses could appear. Health could change. Relationships could change. No financial plan could eliminate uncertainty. But preparation could create room to respond. That was the kind of freedom she wanted. Not a fantasy in which nothing went wrong. A life in which something could go wrong without destroying everything. Financial resilience is not predicting every emergency. It is creating enough margin to respond when the unpredictable arrives. The same concept applied emotionally. She could not prevent every painful memory. She could not guarantee that nobody would disappoint her. She could not ensure every relationship would last. But she could build emotional resources, supportive friendships, professional guidance when needed, healthy routines, financial margin. Boundaries, self-knowledge, communication skills, rest. Purpose. These became her internal emergency fund, not a guarantee against pain, a foundation for recovery. One evening, Maya and her partner sat on the balcony. The city was glowing below them. She looked at him and said, "Do you know what I used to think healing meant? What? That one day I would stop being affected by what happened." He waited. "And now I think healing means I can be affected without being controlled." He nodded slowly. She continued, "I still get scared sometimes. I still have difficult days. I still have memories I'd rather not have. But I don't automatically believe those things mean I'm broken." Her partner reached for her hand. She took it willingly. That small gesture would once have frightened her. Now she could notice the warmth. The pressure of his fingers. The safety of the moment. Her breathing. She did not need to analyze it. She did not need to prove anything. She simply experienced it. And that was perhaps the quietest victory. Not that the past had disappeared. Not that fear would never return. But that the present had become large enough to contain both memory and possibility. Maya looked toward the lights. She understood now that healing was not about erasing history. It was about reclaiming authorship. The past had influenced her. It had shaped some of her fears. It had taught her protective strategies. But it did not have to write every chapter that followed. She could write differently. She could choose differently. She could love differently. She could spend differently. She could speak differently. She could respond differently. And each choice was a declaration. My history matters. But it does not own me. She smiled. There would be more work ahead. There would always be more work. But the work no longer felt like proof that she was defective. It felt like participation in her own life. And perhaps that was the most important shift of all. Healing was not a destination where she would finally become acceptable. Healing was the ongoing practice of treating herself as worthy while she learned, changed, stumbled, repaired, loved, and began again. She no longer asked, "When will I finally be healed?" Instead, she asked a more useful question: "What would caring for myself look like today?" Sometimes the answer was rest. Sometimes it was a conversation. Sometimes it was a boundary. Sometimes it was saving money. Sometimes it was spending money intentionally. Sometimes it was asking for professional help. Sometimes it was saying yes. Sometimes it was saying no. Sometimes it was remembering. Sometimes it was letting go. And sometimes it was simply breathing and allowing the moment to be exactly what it was. That was enough. Not because the journey was finished, because she had finally stopped waiting for the journey to finish before allowing herself to live. And in that realization, she found something she had been searching for all along. Not perfection, not certainty, not a life without pain. Freedom. The quiet freedom to belong to herself. Maya had expected healing to make her life simpler. What she had not expected was that becoming more aware would sometimes make life feel more complicated before it became clear. Once she began paying attention to herself, she started noticing things she had previously moved past without question. She noticed the moment her stomach tightened when someone became disappointed with her. She noticed how quickly she apologized when another person became angry, even when she had done nothing wrong. She noticed how often she said it's okay when it wasn't okay at all. She noticed how easily she could identify everyone else's emotions while remaining uncertain about her own. Most surprising of all, she discovered that some of the habits she had considered personality traits were actually adaptations. She had called herself easygoing because she rarely objected. She had called herself independent because she found it difficult to ask for help. She had called herself generous because she often gave more than she could comfortably afford. She had called herself private because vulnerability frightened her. She had called herself strong because she had learned to endure quietly. The discovery was both liberating and unsettling. If these qualities were not simply who she was, then who was she beneath them? For a while, she felt as though she were standing in a room after someone had removed all the furniture. The room was still hers, but it looked unfamiliar. Old identities had been useful because they gave her a sense of certainty. Without them, she had to make choices from a deeper place. She began asking herself questions she had never taken seriously. What do I actually like? What makes me feel safe? What kind of affection feels nourishing? What kind of attention feels intrusive? When do I feel most alive? What do I do because I genuinely want to do it? And what do I do because I am afraid of disappointing someone? What does enough money mean to me? How much work is enough? What does a healthy relationship look like when nobody is performing? What does rest feel like when I don't have to justify it? Some questions had surprisingly simple answers. She liked quiet mornings. She liked long walks without headphones. She liked cooking when she was not rushed. She liked conversations that wandered without an agenda. She liked learning new things. She liked having money in savings because it made her feel capable rather than because it made her feel superior. She liked being touched affectionately when she felt emotionally connected and free to say no. She liked humor. She liked people who could admit when they were wrong. She liked being around those who did not require her to become smaller in order to make them comfortable. Other questions were harder. She did not always know what she wanted. That frightened her. For much of her life, she had believed that confident people always knew what they wanted. Now she understood that confidence could also mean being willing to discover what you want instead of pretending you already know. I don't know yet became a sentence she practiced. She used it at work. She used it in relationships. She used it with money. She used it with herself. There was tremendous freedom in admitting uncertainty without immediately turning uncertainty into panic. One Saturday afternoon, Maya met her friend Leah at a small cafe. Leah had known her for years and had witnessed some of the changes. They sat near a window while rain moved down the glass in thin lines. You seem different, Leah said. Maya smiled. Different good or different strange? Different quieter. I think I'm listening more. To what? Everything. Leah laughed. That sounds exhausting. Sometimes it is. Maya told her about the questions she had been asking herself. Leah listened carefully. You know what I think, Leah finally said. You spent so long trying to figure out what everyone else needed that you never learned how to hear your own answer. Maya looked down at her coffee. I think you're right. And maybe that's why you're uncomfortable now. Why? Because hearing yourself means you might have to make choices you can't blame on anyone else. Maya laughed softly. There was truth in it. Self-awareness sounds comforting until it removes the excuses that once protected us. If she knew what she needed and ignored it, that was a choice. If she knew a relationship was unhealthy and stayed, that was a choice. If she knew she was spending to escape uncomfortable feelings and continued, that was a choice. If she knew she was exhausted and kept saying yes, that was a choice. Awareness did not eliminate responsibility. It made responsibility more visible. But responsibility did not have to mean blame. Maya was learning to separate accountability from shame. Shame said, "You are bad." Accountability said, "This choice had consequences. What will you do now?" Shame wanted punishment. Accountability wanted repair. Shame kept the person trapped in the past. Accountability asked what could be done in the present. That difference became essential to her healing. She began reviewing difficult moments differently. Instead of replaying them to punish herself, she asked what they could teach her. When she remembered staying silent in situations where she had wanted to speak, she did not call herself weak. She asked why silence had once felt safer than honesty. When she remembered spending money impulsively after stressful days, she did not call herself irresponsible. She asked what emotional need the purchase had been attempting to satisfy. When she remembered relationships in which she had ignored warning signs, she did not call herself foolish. She asked what she had believed she needed those relationships to prove about her. The questions opened doors. Sometimes what she found behind them was painful. She discovered that part of her had spent years believing that being chosen by another person would finally prove she was worthy. If someone desired her, she felt valuable. If someone withdrew, she felt defective. Her emotional stability had become tied to external approval. That realization changed how she approached intimacy. She did not want to stop caring what others thought. Human beings are relational creatures. Connection matters. Being loved matters. But she wanted to stop making another person's response the final authority on her worth. If another person's affection determines whether you believe you are worthy, then your sense of worth is always in someone else's hands. She wrote that sentence in her notebook. Then she added another. Healthy intimacy allows you to be deeply connected without requiring you to disappear. That became a guiding idea. She began practicing connection without self-erasure. When her partner asked how she felt, she tried not to give the answer she thought would create the least conflict. She paused and checked inside. Sometimes the truth was inconvenient. I felt hurt when that happened. I need more time. I want to be closer. But I am nervous. I don't understand what you mean. I want affection right now. I don't want to be touched right now. The first time she said the last sentence, her heart raced. She had expected disappointment. Instead, her partner simply said, "Okay." No argument. No guilt. No punishment. Just okay. The simplicity of the response was almost overwhelming. Maya realized how much of her fear had been built around imagined consequences. She had spent years assuming that if she expressed a boundary, the other person would leave, become angry, or decide she was difficult. Sometimes people would react badly. That was true. But a respectful boundary also revealed something important. It showed whether the relationship could accommodate the reality of two people rather than only the comfort of one. A person who disappears because you say no was not offering genuine safety in the first place. The thought gave her courage. She began to understand boundaries as a form of information gathering. Say no and observe. Express a need and observe. Ask for clarification and observe. Take your time and observe. A healthy relationship did not require constant compliance. It required room for two human beings to exist. This changed her expectations of love. She no longer wanted a relationship in which there was never discomfort. She wanted one in which discomfort could be discussed without becoming dangerous. She no longer expected another person to read her mind. She wanted to learn how to speak clearly. She no longer wanted to be endlessly reassured. She wanted to develop enough internal stability that reassurance could be comforting without becoming an emotional life support system. She also realized that intimacy had many dimensions. Emotional closeness mattered. Physical affection mattered. Sexual connection could matter. Friendship mattered. Shared values mattered. Humor mattered. Practical cooperation mattered. Financial transparency mattered. Respect mattered. The ability to repair after conflict mattered. A relationship could have intense attraction and still lack safety. It could have safety and still need better communication. It could have affection and still contain unhealthy patterns. It could have challenges and still be deeply worthwhile. There was no single ingredient that guaranteed a healthy relationship. Health came from patterns. Patterns of honesty. Patterns of respect. Patterns of choice. Patterns of repair. Patterns of mutuality. Patterns of care. Maya began paying attention to patterns rather than isolated moments. That principle extended into her financial life as well. One expensive purchase did not determine her financial future. 1 month of saving did not guarantee security. One investment did not create wealth. What mattered was the pattern. She created a monthly financial review, not a punishment session, not a judgment, a conversation with herself. How much came in? How much went out? What was necessary? What was meaningful? What was impulsive? What was avoidable? What did I learn? What should change? She stopped using the phrase, "I was bad with money." Instead, she said, "This month, my spending did not match my priorities." That sentence gave her something to work with. She adjusted. She increased automatic savings. She built a stronger emergency reserve. She reduced expensive debt. She reviewed recurring subscriptions. She stopped using shopping as an entertainment when she was emotionally overwhelmed. She created a small amount of guilt-free spending. That discipline did not feel like deprivation. She learned about diversified long-term investing rather than chasing whatever happened to be popular that month. Most importantly, she began defining what financial freedom meant for her. It was not a mansion. It was not a luxury car. It was not being able to purchase anything without checking the price. Financial freedom meant having enough margin that she could make important decisions based on values rather than desperation. If a workplace became unhealthy, she wanted the ability to leave. If a loved one needed help, she wanted some capacity to respond. If she became ill, she wanted reserves. If she wanted to take time to learn something new, she wanted options. If she reached an age when she wanted to work less, she wanted investments and savings that supported that choice. The number was personal. The principle was universal. Money becomes powerful when it buys you options instead of obligations. She thought about how many people increased their income, but simultaneously increased the complexity of their lives. Bigger homes required larger payments. More possessions required more maintenance. More status created more pressure to maintain status. A higher income could produce greater freedom, but it could also produce a more expensive cage. Maya wanted margin. She wanted a life with enough space to breathe. That word kept returning. Space. Emotional space. Financial space. Physical space. Relational space. Mental space. She had spent much of her life filling every available space with responsibility, work, messages. Errands. Social obligations. Other people's needs. Shopping. Entertainment. Noise. Now she began asking what happened when she intentionally left space empty. At first, emptiness made her anxious. She would sit without her phone and immediately reach for something. She would finish her work and feel guilty for not starting another task. She would have a free evening and feel that she was wasting it. She would have money left after paying expenses and feel an urge to spend it. The urge itself became an object of curiosity. What is this feeling? Where do I feel it? What am I afraid will happen if I do nothing? Often the answer was surprisingly simple. If I stop, I might have to feel. Work had been a distraction. Shopping had been a distraction. Constant communication had been a distraction. Even some forms of relationship activity had been a distraction. Silence removed the distractions, and in silence, old feelings could become noticeable. Mana learned not to treat every feeling as an emergency. An emotion is information, not always instruction. Fear can tell you to pay attention without telling you to run. Anger can tell you a boundary may have been crossed without telling you to attack. Sadness can tell you something mattered without telling you that life is hopeless. Desire can tell you what you are drawn toward without requiring immediate action. Shame can appear without being proof of guilt. This distinction helped her tremendously. She could feel something without obeying it. That was a new kind of freedom. One afternoon, she received a message from someone she had known in the past. The message was friendly on the surface, but Maya immediately felt the old tension return. Her first instinct was to respond politely and reopen the relationship. She stopped, she breathed, she noticed her body. Then she asked herself a question she had learned to trust. Do I actually want this, or do I want to avoid feeling guilty? The answer was clear. She did not want to reopen the relationship. She did not owe any elaborate explanation. She responded kindly and firmly. Then she put the phone down. Her body remained tense for a while, but she did not change her decision merely to make the discomfort disappear. That was progress. She was learning that emotional discomfort could be temporary, while a wise decision could be lasting. This was another connection between healing and financial discipline. If she bought something unnecessary, the emotional discomfort might disappear for an hour. The financial consequence could remain for months. If she avoided an uncomfortable boundary conversation, she might feel relief for the evening. The resentment could remain for years. Short-term relief was not always the same thing as long-term well-being. Ask yourself whether the choice that feels easiest now will still feel wise when the emotion has passed. The sentence became one of her most useful principles. She used it before purchases, before difficult conversations, before major career decisions, before responding to criticism, before making relationship commitments. She began thinking in time horizons. What feels good now? What will feel good tomorrow? What will I respect about this decision next year? What kind of person does this choice train me to become? The last question was particularly powerful. Every choice reinforced something. If she repeatedly avoided difficult conversations, she trained herself to avoid. If she repeatedly spent to escape discomfort, she trained herself to spend. If she repeatedly listened to her needs, she trained herself to trust. If she repeatedly saved, she trained herself to build margin. If she repeatedly told the truth, she trained herself to live honestly. Identity was not only something she discovered, it was something she practiced. Every repeated choice is a small vote for the person you are becoming. Maya began to think of her life as a series of votes, not one enormous decision, thousands of small ones. The vote to sleep instead of scrolling, the vote to save instead of impress, the vote to speak instead of suppress, the vote to pause instead of react, the vote to listen instead of assume, the vote to leave when a boundary was repeatedly ignored, the vote to stay when something valuable required patience, the vote to ask for help. The vote to forgive herself, the vote to begin again. Some votes were tiny, but tiny things accumulate. A person does not become financially secure through one dramatic act of saving. They become more secure through repeated behavior. A person does not become emotionally trustworthy through one profound conversation. They become trustworthy through repeated honesty. A relationship does not become safe because of one romantic evening. Safety develops through patterns. Healing works the same way. Maya began respecting small changes. One calm breath, one honest sentence, one boundary, one intentional purchase, one night of rest, one difficult conversation, one moment of choosing curiosity over shame. She stopped waiting for dramatic transformation. The ordinary became meaningful. This was particularly important because her healing sometimes felt slow. She had imagined that understanding herself would automatically change her reactions. It did not. Knowing intellectually that she was safe did not always convince her body immediately. Knowing that she was allowed to say no did not erase the guilt. Knowing that she deserved love did not instantly eliminate the fear of rejection. Knowledge was necessary. Practice was different. Her nervous system needed repeated experiences. Safe interaction, respectful touch, honest communication, predictable boundaries. Rest. Support. Time. The body learns through experience. So Maya stopped demanding instant results. She treated herself as someone learning a new language. No one expects fluency after reading a dictionary. You practice, you make mistakes, you misunderstand, you try again. Eventually the new language becomes more natural. Healing was similar. At times, old reactions returned. When they did, Maya tried not to panic. An old response returning does not mean you have lost all your progress. She repeated that sentence often. A difficult day did not erase a year of growth. A trigger did not mean she was back at the beginning. A mistake did not invalidate every good decision that came before it. She learned to measure progress by recovery time. How long did it take to notice? How long did it take to regulate? How long before she could communicate? How quickly could she return to herself? The timeline shortened. That mattered. She also learned the importance of professional support. Some experiences were too complex to work through alone, and there was no virtue in pretending otherwise. Seeking a qualified therapist or other appropriate professional was not an admission of failure. It was a practical decision. If a person had a serious physical injury, they would seek medical expertise. Emotional wounds deserved appropriate care. Maya became less embarrassed about asking for help. She discovered that support could come in many forms: therapy, trusted friends, medical care when appropriate, educational resources, supportive communities, and healthy relationships. But she also learned to evaluate advice carefully. Not every confident person was qualified. Not every viral technique was appropriate for everyone. Not every promise of rapid transformation was trustworthy. Healing is not a product with guaranteed results. That lesson extended to money. The internet was full of financial promises: get rich quickly, guaranteed returns. Secret strategies. Perfect investments. Maya became skeptical of certainty. She preferred principles over predictions, diversification over concentration without understanding, long-term thinking over emotional trading, transparent fees over hidden costs, education over hype. Sustainable habits over dramatic promises. The same mindset protected her emotionally. There were people selling instant confidence, instant healing, instant relationship transformation, instant solutions to deeply human problems. Maya learned to ask, what is the evidence? Who is making the claim? What are the risks? What happens if this doesn't work? Is this helping me become more capable, or more dependent on the person selling the solution? That final question was powerful. Good support should increase your capacity to make choices. It should not make you permanently dependent on someone else's authority. Maya wanted to become more capable. More capable of listening to herself, more capable of communicating, more capable of managing money, more capable of recognizing unhealthy patterns, more capable of asking for help, more capable of tolerating uncertainty, more capable of giving and receiving affection freely. Capability became her definition of progress. Not perfection. Capability. One evening, after a difficult conversation with her partner, Maya found herself crying in the kitchen. Nothing terrible had happened. They had simply disagreed about something important, and the conversation had touched an old fear. For a moment, she wanted to shut down. She felt the familiar impulse to disappear. Instead, she told him, "I'm getting overwhelmed. I need 10 minutes." He nodded. She went outside. The old Maya would have interpreted the argument as proof that intimacy was unsafe. The new Maya asked a different question. Can I stay connected to myself while we disagree? She breathed. She felt her feet against the ground. She noticed the evening air. She let herself cry. 10 minutes later, she returned. The disagreement was still there, but she was still there too. They talked, not perfectly, but honestly, and when the conversation ended, neither of them had won. They had understood each other better. Maya went to bed that night with an unfamiliar sense of satisfaction. The relationship had not been perfect. The conversation had not been smooth, but she had remained herself inside it. That was intimacy. Not losing yourself in another person, not controlling another person, not avoiding every difficult feeling. To people remaining present enough to meet one another honestly. She thought about how different this was from her old definition of love. She had once thought love meant being needed. Now she thought love meant being chosen freely. She had once thought safety meant never being challenged. Now she thought safety meant being able to face challenges without fear of humiliation or retaliation. She had once thought closeness meant constant access. Now she understood that closeness could coexist with individuality. She had once thought vulnerability meant giving someone the power to hurt you. Now she understood that vulnerability also meant giving someone the opportunity to know you honestly. The distinction mattered. She could not guarantee that vulnerability would never lead to pain. Nothing could. But she could choose people who treated vulnerability responsibly. She could communicate clearly. She could maintain boundaries. She could leave situations that became harmful. She could support herself financially and emotionally. She could remember that being rejected did not make her unworthy. These capacities changed the risk calculation of intimacy. She did not need certainty before connecting. She needed enough self-trust to know that if something went wrong, she would respond. That was a profound shift. The goal was not to eliminate risk. It was to increase resilience. The same was true financially. No investment was risk-free. No career was guaranteed. No economy was predictable. No amount of savings could eliminate every possible emergency. But resilience could be built. Maya began seeing life as a process of building resilience across multiple areas. Financial resilience through savings and thoughtful investing. Emotional resilience through awareness and support. Physical resilience through rest and health practices. Relational resilience through communication and boundaries. Professional resilience through skills and adaptability. The stronger each area became, the less one unexpected event could destroy her entire sense of security. She did not need a perfect life. She needed a life with enough internal and external resources to recover. That became her broader philosophy. Build margin. Protect what matters. Learn continuously. Choose carefully. Stay connected. Tell the truth. Accept uncertainty. And when you fall out of alignment, return. One morning, months later, Maya stood in front of her bathroom mirror. She looked at herself without immediately evaluating. There were things she liked, things she did not like, things she was still changing, things she had stopped caring about. For the first time, the mirror did not feel like a courtroom. It was simply a mirror. She touched her face. She thought about the younger version of herself who had believed that being loved required becoming easier, quieter, prettier, more agreeable, more successful, more desirable, more financially impressive, or less complicated. She wished she could go back and speak to that girl. She would not tell her that nothing bad would ever happen, that promise would be impossible. She would not tell her that everyone would treat her well. She would not tell her that healing would be quick. It wouldn't be. She would tell her something more useful. You do not have to abandon yourself to be loved. You do not have to earn your right to have boundaries. You do not have to turn your body into a performance. You do not have to spend money to prove your worth. You do not have to understand everything before you begin. You do not have to heal perfectly. You only have to begin listening. Maya closed her eyes. Then she smiled. She knew there were still parts of herself she had not met, that no longer frightened her. It made her curious, because healing had changed its meaning. It was no longer a project of repairing a defective person. It was an ongoing relationship with herself, a relationship built through attention, a relationship strengthened through honesty, a relationship protected by boundaries, a relationship deepened through compassion, a relationship made trustworthy through repeated action. And just as she had learned that intimacy with another person required trust, she was learning that intimacy with herself required the same thing. She had to believe that, when she listened inwardly, she would not immediately punish what she discovered. If she was tired, she could rest. If she was afraid, she could investigate. If she was angry, she could ask what boundary had been crossed. If she wanted something, she could explore whether the desire reflected her values. If she did not want something, she could say no. If she made a mistake, she could repair it. If she needed help, she could ask. That was self-trust. Not always knowing the right answer, knowing that you can respond honestly to whatever answer emerges. And that, Maya realized, might be one of the greatest freedoms a person can build. Not freedom from fear. Freedom from being ruled by fear. Not freedom from desire. Freedom to choose what to do with desire. Not freedom from uncertainty. Freedom to remain grounded inside uncertainty. Not freedom from money concerns. Freedom to make financial choices that serve the life you actually want. Not freedom from relationships. Freedom to participate in relationships without abandoning yourself. She looked out the window. The day had begun. There was work waiting. Bills would need to be paid. Markets would rise and fall. People would misunderstand one another. Some plans would work. Others would fail. Her body would continue changing. Her relationships would continue evolving. Life would remain unpredictable, but she was no longer asking life to become predictable before she allowed herself to feel safe. She was building something stronger. The ability to meet change, the ability to pause, the ability to choose, the ability to return. And as she walked out of the room, she carried one final thought with her. Healing does not mean creating a life in which nothing can hurt you. It means creating a life in which pain no longer has to make you disappear from yourself. Maya had spent years trying to become invulnerable. Now she wanted something better. She wanted to remain open without becoming unprotected. She wanted to love without losing herself. She wanted to build wealth without becoming possessed by it. She wanted to care for her body without turning it into an object of judgment. She wanted to experience intimacy without confusing pressure with passion. She wanted to be generous without becoming depleted. She wanted to be independent without becoming isolated. She wanted to be strong without becoming numb. And perhaps most importantly, she wanted to discover who she was when she no longer had to spend every day defending herself from an imagined future. She did not have all the answers. She did not need them. She had something more useful. A growing ability to listen, a willingness to pause, a commitment to tell the truth, a financial plan that gave her breathing room, a relationship in which boundaries could exist beside affection, a body she was learning to respect, a past she could acknowledge without surrendering her future to it, and the quiet understanding that every day offered another opportunity to practice. Not perfection. Practice. One choice, then another. Then another, until the choices became habits, until the habits became trust, until the trust became freedom. Maya had begun to understand that healing was not a straight road, but she had not yet understood how deeply the past could influence the present without announcing itself. She had assumed that once she knew her patterns, she would automatically be able to change them. Instead, awareness sometimes made the patterns more visible before it made them weaker. She could recognize an old reaction while it was happening and still feel unable to stop it. She could know that a particular fear belonged to the past and still experience it as though it were happening in the present. She could remind herself that she was safe and still feel her body preparing for danger. At first, this frustrated her. Then she began to see that recognition itself was a form of progress. She did not need to win every internal battle. She needed to become capable of observing what was happening without immediately turning against herself. One morning, while making breakfast, she noticed her mind racing through a list of unfinished tasks: work, bills, a message she had not answered, an upcoming conversation, an investment account she wanted to review, a family obligation. She felt the familiar pressure building in her chest. Her instinct was to move faster. She had learned that, when anxiety appeared, productivity could temporarily silence it. If she kept moving, there was less room to feel. She reached for her phone, then stopped. She placed it on the counter. She took a breath. She looked around the kitchen. Some light had fallen across the table. Somewhere outside, a bird was calling. The refrigerator hummed. Her hands were warm around the cup she was holding. Nothing had been solved, yet something had changed. She was no longer allowing anxiety to dictate the speed of the morning. She began to recognize how often urgency was manufactured by the mind. Not every thought required action. Not every feeling required resolution. Not every message required an immediate response. Not every financial fluctuation required a decision. Not every relationship discomfort meant something was fundamentally wrong. The ability to distinguish signal from noise became one of the most valuable skills she developed. Awareness does not require you to act on everything you notice. Sometimes awareness simply asks you to stay long enough to understand. That principle became especially important in her relationship. As trust deepened, so did vulnerability. Vulnerability brought warmth, but it also brought fear. When Maya cared deeply about someone, there was more to lose. That realization occasionally made her want to retreat. She had once believed that the safest way to avoid pain was to avoid becoming attached. Now she understood that emotional safety could not mean eliminating the possibility of loss. Love always contains some uncertainty. The goal was not to become incapable of being hurt. The goal was to become capable of remaining grounded even when uncertainty existed. Her partner noticed when she became distant. Instead of demanding an explanation, he asked gently, "Are you needing space, or are you feeling afraid?" The question surprised her. "I don't know, that's okay." She sat quietly. After a moment she said, "I think I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of needing you too much." He considered the statement. What would needing someone mean to you? Maya looked down. It used to mean weakness, and now? "I think it means being human." He smiled. "That sounds healthier." She laughed. The conversation stayed with her. For years she had treated independence as protection. She had believed that if she could manage everything alone, no one would have the power to disappoint her. But genuine independence was not the absence of connection. It was the ability to choose connection without believing you would cease to exist without it. She wanted interdependence rather than dependence or isolation. Interdependence meant to people capable of standing individually while also supporting one another. It meant accepting help without surrendering autonomy. It meant giving without keeping score. It meant asking for support without turning the other person into a permanent emotional regulator. That distinction transformed how she communicated. Instead of saying, "You need to make me feel better," she could say, "I'm struggling and I would appreciate being close to you." Instead of, "You never understand me," she could say, "I don't feel understood right now. Can we talk about what happened?" Instead of, "You don't care," she could say, "When that happened, I interpreted it as distance, and I need reassurance about what you meant." Language became a bridge rather than a weapon. She also discovered that assumptions were often attempts to avoid vulnerability. Asking directly was more frightening than guessing, because a direct question could produce an answer she did not want. But guessing created entire emotional worlds based on incomplete information. She practiced asking, "What did you mean? Are you upset with me? Would you like some space? Can I tell you how that felt for me? Is this a good time to talk?" These questions sounded ordinary. For Maya, they represented enormous growth. She was learning that healthy communication did not mean never experiencing misunderstanding. It meant having a process for repairing misunderstanding. That process became especially important when conflict arose. Maya and her partner still disagreed. Sometimes they became defensive. Sometimes one of them spoke too quickly. Sometimes old sensitivities appeared. The difference was that they began noticing the escalation sooner. When voices rose, they paused. When one person became overwhelmed, they took space, but the space was different from withdrawal. Withdrawal said, "I am leaving you." A healthy pause said, "I need to regulate so I can return to this conversation." That distinction protected their relationship. They created a simple agreement. If either person needed a break, they would communicate that they intended to return. It sounded simple. It was powerful. A pause without reassurance could feel like abandonment. A pause with a clear intention to return could create safety. Maya learned that repair was not an optional feature of intimacy. It was central to it. Every relationship accumulates misunderstandings. Every person has blind spots. Every partner will occasionally fail to notice something important. The question is not whether mistakes happen. The question is what happens afterward. Do we defend? Do we blame? Do we minimize? Do we disappear? Or do we become curious? "I see that I hurt you. I didn't understand before, but I do now. I'm sorry. Can we try again?" These sentences became more valuable to Mayo than grand declarations. She discovered that consistency was more reassuring than intensity. A person who said beautiful things but ignored boundaries did not create safety. A person who occasionally made mistakes but consistently repaired them could. That insight changed how she evaluated people. She stopped being impressed primarily by charm. She watched behavior. How does this person respond to no? How do they react? When they are disappointed, can they apologize without adding excuses? Can they accept feedback? Do they respect privacy? Do they keep commitments? Do they become cruel when angry? Do they use affection as a bargaining tool? Do they treat vulnerability as information to weaponize later? These questions became her relational compass. She realized that compatibility was not simply shared interests or attraction. Character mattered. Emotional responsibility mattered. Respect mattered. The capacity for repair mattered. The willingness to grow mattered. The same principle applied to business relationships. Maya had become more careful about who she worked with. She had once accepted opportunities because they looked impressive. Now she examined the underlying relationship. How does this person treat people with less power? What happens when money becomes tight? Are expectations clear? Are agreements documented? Can disagreement happen without humiliation? Does the opportunity require her to violate her values? Is the compensation worth the time, risk, and stress? What is the opportunity cost? She learned that saying yes to one thing meant saying no to something else. Time, unlike money, could not be replenished. Money could sometimes be earned again. Time could not. That realization changed her definition of wealth. She still valued financial security, but she began seeing time as an even more fundamental form of capital. Money can buy back some choices. It cannot buy back yesterday. The statement made her examine her schedule. She was earning more than she had several years earlier, but was she living better? Not necessarily. If increased income came with increased exhaustion, constant availability, and less time for meaningful relationships, then the financial gain had a hidden cost. She began calculating not only financial return, but life return. A project that paid well, but consumed every evening might not be worth it. A job that paid slightly less, but provided autonomy might be more valuable. An investment that required constant monitoring might be less suitable for her than a simpler long-term approach. A possession that required maintenance might cost more than its purchase price. This did not mean she rejected ambition. She simply became more selective. She wanted to build a life rather than merely accumulate achievements. That distinction also changed her approach to career growth. She focused on skills that increased her future options. Communication, writing, negotiation, technology, financial literacy, leadership, emotional regulation, problem solving. She began thinking of skills as portable assets. If a company disappeared, a skill could travel. If an industry changed, adaptability could help. If the economy shifted, a strong foundation could provide options. Financial freedom was therefore not only about investments. It was also about earning capacity, judgment, and resilience. She created a principle for herself: build wealth in 3 directions: what you own, what you know, and who you can become. The first referred to financial assets, the second referred to knowledge and skills, the third referred to adaptability. A person could lose money and rebuild. A person could lose a job and learn. A person could lose a relationship and heal, but only if they had developed the capacity to begin again. That was the kind of wealth Maya wanted. Portable wealth. Not merely things she possessed, but capacities nobody could easily take away. She also learned to distinguish financial freedom from financial avoidance. Some people talked about freedom because they did not want to look at numbers. Maya understood that ignoring money did not make money less important. It made the consequences less visible. She started having regular conversations about finances with her partner. They discussed spending. Savings. Long-term goals. Risk. Emergency reserves. Shared expenses. individual autonomy. They did not merge every financial decision simply because they were in a relationship. They created transparency without eliminating individuality. That was important to Maya. She wanted closeness without financial entanglement becoming control. They agreed that both people should understand the household financial picture. They also maintained some personal spending autonomy. Money should not become a tool for punishment. Neither person should have to ask permission to buy every small personal item. At the same time, major commitments require discussion. The system was not perfect, but it was intentional. They understood that financial conflict often carried deeper emotional meanings. One person might hear, "We need to save more," and interpret it as "you are irresponsible." Another might hear, "I want to spend this," and interpret it as "our future doesn't matter to you." The words were financial. The emotions were relational. So they learned to ask what was underneath. What does financial security mean to you? What are you afraid would happen if we didn't have enough savings? What does spending this represent? Is this about the purchase? Or about feeling restricted? The conversations became surprisingly intimate. Money revealed beliefs about safety, childhood, status, scarcity, generosity, independence, and control. Maya realized that financial education without emotional awareness was incomplete. A person could know exactly how compound growth worked and still sabotage their finances because they could not tolerate delayed gratification. Someone could understand budgeting and still overspend when lonely. Someone could earn a high income and remain financially insecure because their identity required constant consumption. Someone could have little money and still develop strong habits of saving and planning. Behavior was rarely just arithmetic. It was psychology. This realization made Maya gentler with herself. She still held herself accountable, but she became curious about the emotional meaning of her financial decisions. When she wanted to spend, she asked what she was seeking. When she wanted to avoid looking at her accounts, she asked what she feared seeing. When she wanted to take an investment risk, she asked whether the opportunity was sound or whether she was chasing excitement. When she felt envy towards someone wealthier, she asked what the envy was telling her. Sometimes envy revealed a genuine goal. Sometimes it revealed a need for recognition. Sometimes it revealed comparison. Sometimes it revealed exhaustion. Not every desire needed to become a goal. That was another lesson. A person can admire something without needing to own it. She could see someone traveling constantly and appreciate the freedom without wanting their lifestyle. She could see an expensive home and appreciate its design without wanting the maintenance. She could see someone with a prestigious career and admire their skill without wanting their schedule. Comparison became less threatening when she separated admiration from obligation. She could choose. The more she chose intentionally, the less she needed to prove. This reduced her consumption. It also reduced her anxiety. She stopped asking, "Am I keeping up?" She started asking, "Is this enough for the life I want?" The question was surprisingly difficult. Enough is not a universal number. Enough depends on values. For Maya, enough meant being able to cover necessities, maintain a reasonable reserve, invest for the future, support important people when she could, enjoy experiences, and retain meaningful control over her time. It did not require luxury. That definition gave her peace. But emotional healing continued to challenge her. One afternoon, an unexpected trigger brought an old memory close to the surface. She felt suddenly small and frightened. The reaction seemed to come from nowhere. She wanted to dismiss it. Instead, she sat down. She placed her feet on the floor. She looked around the room. She named what she could see. She reminded herself of where she was and when she was. She breathed slowly. She did not force the memory away. She did not interrogate herself. She did not demand a complete explanation. She simply grounded herself in the present. Eventually, the intensity softened. Maya realized something important. She did not have to understand every feeling immediately in order to care for herself appropriately. Sometimes the first step was simply safety. Later, when she felt stable, She could explore what had happened with appropriate support. This became another foundational principle. When the emotional storm is strong, safety comes before analysis. She had spent years trying to think her way out of distress. Now she understood that intense emotional states could reduce the ability to reason clearly. Regulation came first, meaning came later. That lesson also influenced her communication. If she was highly activated, she did not force herself to solve the relationship immediately. If she was panicked about money, she did not make a major investment decision. If she was furious, she did not send the message. If she was exhausted, she did not make permanent conclusions about her life. She learned to delay irreversible decisions during temporary emotional storms. Never let a temporary emotional state make a permanent decision for you. The principle became one of her most trusted rules. Not every emotion needed to be suppressed. It simply did not need to be handed the steering wheel. Maya became increasingly comfortable with the idea that healing was partly the development of a larger gap between stimulus and response. Something happens. She notices. She breathes. She interprets. She chooses. That gap was where freedom lived. The old Maya had almost no gap. Something happened, and she reacted. A disappointed friend, and she apologized. A frightening sensation, and she withdrew. A stressful day, and she spent. A conflict, and she shut down. A compliment, and she felt temporarily worthy. A criticism, and she felt worthless. Her emotional life had been externally controlled. Now she was building an internal center. Not an impenetrable wall. A center. She could remain connected to others while retaining contact with herself. This changed her friendships to. She began noticing which relationships allowed mutuality. Some friends welcomed the changes. Others became uncomfortable. One friend complained that Maya had become too serious because she no longer agreed automatically to every plan. Another said she was different because she had started protecting her evenings. Maya felt guilty. Then she remembered something important. Growth changes relationships. Not every relationship is designed to survive every version of you. Some relationships deepen because both people grow. Others weaken because the old arrangement depended on your lack of boundaries. That did not necessarily make either person evil. It meant the relationship had been built around certain expectations. Maya was changing those expectations. She had to accept that some people might not like it. That was painful, but necessary. Sometimes the cost of becoming more honest is discovering who only loved your compliance. The sentence stayed with her. She did not want to become cynical. She did not assume that everyone who disagreed with her was unhealthy. People could simply have different needs. A friend might genuinely prefer more spontaneous plans. Maya might prefer more quiet time. Neither was wrong. The issue was whether they could negotiate differences respectfully. That became her standard. Difference was not danger. Disagreement was not rejection. A boundary was not hostility. A request was not a demand. A need was not an obligation. A refusal was not an insult. These distinctions created emotional room. She began to see how many conflicts were caused by assigning meanings that did not necessarily exist. Someone says no. We hear, they don't care about me. Someone needs space. We hear, they are leaving. Someone asks for reassurance. We hear, they are needy. Someone wants independence. We hear, they don't love me. Learning to ask rather than assume reduced unnecessary suffering. Maya became more comfortable saying, "Can you tell me what you meant?" Sometimes the answer changed everything. She also learned that her own communication could create confusion. If she said, "whatever," when she meant "I'm hurt," she was asking another person to decode her. If she said "it's fine," when it wasn't, she was creating a problem she would later resent. Clear communication was kinder than hidden tests. She began replacing indirect signals with direct requests. "Could you sit with me? I need reassurance. I need some quiet. I'd like more affection. I don't want to discuss this right now. I want to understand your perspective." The more directly she spoke, the less resentment accumulated. Not every request was granted. That was important. Communication was not a tool for controlling another person. It was a tool for revealing reality. You can ask. The other person can answer. Then both people make choices. That was freedom. Maya also became more aware of consent and mutuality in intimate situations. She understood that genuine connection requires willingness, not merely the absence of resistance. A person who is silent, frozen, afraid, pressured, or emotionally disconnected may not be freely participating even if they have not explicitly objected. Healthy intimacy leaves room for communication, changing one's mind, checking in, and stopping without punishment. She learned to treat her own yes as something valuable. A yes given freely felt different from a yes given because saying no seemed dangerous. The more she practiced choice, the more meaningful her yes became. She no longer wanted intimacy based on obligation. She wanted participation. Presence. Mutual desire. Respect. Curiosity. Trust. She realized that a healthy intimate relationship is not a performance in which one person must deliver the right experience to another. It is a shared process of listening and responding. Sometimes closeness would feel easy. Sometimes it would require conversation. Sometimes one person would want connection while the other needed rest. Sometimes both would feel affectionate. Sometimes neither would. The goal was not to force the moment. The goal was to respect the reality of the moment. That was a profound change from her earlier belief that she had to perform a particular version of herself to be lovable. She no longer wanted to be admired, an image. She wanted to be known as a person. A person with preferences. Limits. Desires. Fears. Strengths. Weaknesses. A past. A future. A changing body. A changing mind. A financial life. A private inner world. The whole person. As she became more comfortable with this complexity, her shame began losing some of its authority. Shame thrives in secrecy. When something can be spoken about with compassion, it becomes easier to understand. Maya began choosing carefully who could hear the more vulnerable parts of her story. Not everyone deserved access. That was another boundary. Vulnerability was not indiscriminate disclosure. It was intentional openness with people capable of handling what was shared. She learned that privacy and secrecy were different. Privacy protected something valuable. Secrecy often protected something painful from being seen. Not every private experience needed to become public, but shame often needed a safe place to be spoken. She found that place. And gradually, the story she told herself about who she was changed. She was no longer the woman who could not trust. She was a woman learning trust. She was no longer the woman who could not relax. She was a woman learning regulation. She was no longer the woman who was bad with money. She was a woman building financial skill. She was no longer the woman who was too complicated for intimacy. She was a woman learning what safe intimacy required. The wording mattered. Identity is powerful. If you repeatedly tell yourself that you are incapable, your brain begins collecting evidence for incapability. If you tell yourself that you are learning, mistakes become information. Maya did not want false positivity. She wanted accurate compassion. She was learning. Sometimes slowly, sometimes imperfectly, but genuinely. That was enough. One evening, she opened the notebook she had kept since the beginning of her journey. The early pages were filled with fear. What if I never change? What if nobody understands me? What if I ruin this relationship? What if I never feel safe? What if I cannot trust myself? What if I never become financially secure? She turned the pages. Later entries looked different. Today I noticed. Today I paused. Today I asked. Today I saved. Today I said no. Today I accepted help. Today I repaired. Today I stayed. Today I left. Today I rested. Today I chose. She smiled. The questions had not disappeared. They had changed. Now she asked, what would support me today? What does the situation require? What choice aligns with my values? What would future me thank me for? What does enough look like here? What is mine to carry? What belongs to someone else? What am I feeling? What do I need? What am I willing to do next? These questions were not magical, but they were useful. and usefulness was becoming more important to her than certainty. She did not need to know exactly how her life would unfold. She needed to know how she wanted to participate in it. That was the heart of her transformation. She had once searched for guarantees. Now she searched for capacity. Capacity to respond, capacity to recover, capacity to communicate, capacity to save. Capacity to choose, capacity to love, capacity to say no, capacity to ask for help, capacity to remain present. The stronger that capacity became, the less frightening uncertainty felt. Life would always contain unknowns, but uncertainty was no longer an empty room. It was simply the place where the next choice had not yet been made. Maya could live there. She could breathe there. She could wait there. She could learn there. She could choose there. And perhaps that was what freedom had been pointing toward all along. Not a perfect future. A stronger relationship with the present. Not the absence of fear. The ability to feel fear without surrendering every decision to it. Not unlimited wealth. Enough financial margin to protect meaningful choices. Not perfect intimacy. Enough trust to be honest. Enough boundaries to remain yourself. And enough compassion to keep learning together. Not a life without wounds. A life in which wounds no longer dictated every movement. Maya closed her notebook. Tomorrow would bring another opportunity to practice. She knew that now. The journey would continue, and she was no longer afraid of continuing, because she had finally learned something that could not be taken from her easily. She did not have to know exactly where the road ended. She only needed to know how to take the next step without abandoning herself. The next stage of Maya's journey began when she realized that understanding herself was not enough. She had spent months learning to identify her emotions, recognize old patterns, establish boundaries, communicate more honestly, and become more intentional with money. Yet a strange question began to emerge beneath all that progress. What would she do with her freedom? It was easier, in some ways, to focus on healing from the past than to decide what kind of future she actually wanted. The past provided explanations. The future demanded choices, and choices carried responsibility. There was no longer a convenient story that everything would change once someone else behaved differently. She had begun to understand that her life could not be built entirely around recovering from what had happened. Eventually, healing had to become the foundation from which she lived, not the subject around which her entire life revolved. One evening she sat beside the window with a notebook open across her knees. Rain tapped softly against the glass. She had written a sentence at the top of the page. If I were no longer trying to prove anything, how would I live? She stared at it for several minutes. The question felt more difficult than she expected. For years, so many of her decisions had been connected to approval. Work hard enough to be respected. Look good enough to be admired. Earn enough to feel secure. Be agreeable enough to remain loved. Be successful enough to silence criticism. Be independent enough that nobody could say she needed them. She had mistaken achievement for identity. She had mistaken approval for belonging. She had mistaken financial accumulation for safety. She had mistaken sexual desirability for intimacy. Now she wanted to separate the things she genuinely valued from the things she had pursued because she feared being judged. She began writing without editing herself. She wanted a life that felt spacious. She wanted mornings that did not begin with panic. She wanted meaningful work without making work the measure of her worth. She wanted friendships where conversation could be honest. She wanted love that did not require performance. She wanted intimacy that included laughter, curiosity, tenderness, consent, and room for changing feelings. She wanted money that created choices rather than obligations. She wanted to care for her body without constantly negotiating with an imaginary audience. She wanted to travel sometimes, stay home sometimes, learn continuously, help people she cared about, and have enough quiet that she could hear her own thoughts. When she finished writing, she noticed that almost none of her desires required impressing anyone. That realization was both peaceful and uncomfortable. She had spent years building a life that looked successful from the outside. Now she wanted to build one that felt meaningful from the inside. This distinction changed how she approached ambition. She did not abandon ambition, she refined it. Ambition no longer meant climbing as high as possible regardless of cost. It meant directing effort towards something worth having. There was a difference between wanting more and wanting better. More money could be useful. More status could be seductive. More possessions could be enjoyable, but none of those automatically created a meaningful life. She began asking herself a more precise question whenever she wanted something. What problem do I believe this will solve? Sometimes the answer was practical. A larger emergency fund would genuinely create security. A better computer would improve her work. Training could increase her earning capacity. A comfortable home could support rest. But sometimes the answer was emotional. If I buy this, I'll feel successful. If I look like this, I'll feel attractive. If I earn this amount, nobody can look down on me. If this person wants me, I'll finally know I'm desirable. Those answers revealed something important. She had sometimes been asking external things to repair internal wounds. No purchase could permanently accomplish that. No amount of admiration could create stable self-worth. No partner could permanently eliminate insecurity. No salary could guarantee emotional safety. Money could provide resources, but it could not decide what those resources meant. Maya began treating money as a tool rather than a verdict. A low bank balance did not make her a failure. A high bank balance would not automatically make her valuable. Financial success was simply one dimension of life. This perspective allowed her to become more disciplined without becoming ashamed. She created a financial system that was boring by design. A portion of every paycheck moved automatically into savings. Another portion went toward long-term investments appropriate to her circumstances and risk tolerance. Necessary expenses were tracked. High-interest debt was prioritized. She maintained an emergency reserve. She allowed herself discretionary spending without turning every purchase into a moral referendum. The system was not exciting. That was precisely why she trusted it. She had learned that financial freedom was often built through ordinary actions, repeated long enough to become powerful. Freedom rarely arrives through one spectacular financial decision. It is usually constructed quietly, through habits that seem almost too ordinary to matter. She thought about compounding. Not just investment compounding, but behavioral compounding. A small amount saved repeatedly became meaningful capital. A small skill practiced repeatedly became expertise. A small boundary repeated consistently became self-respect. A small act of honesty repeated became trust. A small moment of rest repeated became a healthier relationship with exhaustion. The principle was everywhere. What we repeat becomes our environment. What we tolerate becomes part of our relationships. What we practice becomes part of our identity. What we invest in compounds. That realization made her more careful about small choices. She did not obsess over them. She simply respected them. One afternoon she received an unexpected opportunity at work. It offered more money, more visibility, and a prestigious title. Her old self would have accepted immediately. The new Maya paused. She examined the details. The role would require frequent travel. It would reduce her flexibility. It would put her under a manager known for unpredictable expectations. The compensation was attractive, but the time cost was significant. She calculated the additional income against the additional expenses, stress, and opportunity cost. Then she asked herself what she had been avoiding. The answer was uncomfortable. She wanted the title because she imagined it would prove that she had finally become successful. There it was again. Proof. She almost laughed. After all her work, she was still vulnerable to the same temptation. She called a trusted mentor and talked it through. Don't ask only what the opportunity gives you, the mentor said. Ask what it asks from you. The sentence stayed with Maya. Every opportunity had a price. Sometimes the price was money, sometimes time, sometimes attention. Sometimes health. Sometimes freedom, sometimes relationships. The best decision was not always the one with the largest visible reward, Maya declined the role. For several days, she worried that she had made a mistake. Then she noticed something. She was sleeping better. She had more time. She could continue building skills. She could work on a project she actually cared about. She had not become less ambitious. She had become more selective about where ambition belonged. That distinction gave her confidence. She began thinking of her life as an allocation problem. Every day, she had limited hours. Every week, limited energy. Every year, limited attention. Where would she invest them? Money was only one form of capital. Attention was capital. Energy was capital. Trust was capital. Health was capital. Relationships were capital. She wanted to invest them intentionally. That principle also changed how she approached intimacy. She no longer wanted to give unlimited emotional energy to people who gave little in return. She did not believe relationships should be perfectly equal every day. People go through difficult seasons. Sometimes one person needs more support. Sometimes the balance changes, but reciprocity mattered over time. A relationship in which one person was permanently responsible for carrying the emotional weight was not sustainable. Maya began recognizing the difference between compassion and self-abandonment. Compassion said, "I understand that you're struggling." Self-abandonment said, "Your struggle means my needs no longer matter." Compassion could coexist with boundaries. "I care about you, and I cannot do that. I understand you're angry, and I won't stay in a conversation where I'm being insulted. I want to support you, and I also need rest. I love you, and I disagree." These statements once seemed contradictory. Now they felt mature. She realized that boundaries were not walls designed to keep everyone out. They were information about how connection could remain healthy. A relationship without boundaries could become confusing. Where one person's feelings ended and another's became unclear. One person's responsibility expanded to include another person's entire emotional state. Maya no longer wanted that. She wanted closeness with differentiation. She wanted to know where she ended and another person began. That did not reduce intimacy. It made intimacy more honest. She could say, "I know you're disappointed." She did not have to say, "Therefore I must do what you want." She could say, "I understand your perspective." She did not have to say, "Therefore your perspective is correct." She could say, "I care about your feelings." She did not have to say, "Your feelings determine my decision." This was a profound form of emotional freedom. It allowed her to remain compassionate without becoming controlled by guilt. Guilt had once been one of her strongest forces. Now she examined it. Was I actually responsible for harm? Did I violate my values? Did I break a commitment? Or is someone simply disappointed because I made a reasonable choice? Those were different things. Healthy guilt could guide repair. Unhealthy guilt could be the residue of conditioning. Maya learned to tell the difference. She also became more aware of the ways people sometimes use guilt to control others. "If you loved me, you would. After everything I've done for you, you're selfish. You're changing. You used to be better." Such statements could make a person question reasonable boundaries. Maya no longer responded automatically. She could acknowledge the feeling without accepting the accusation. "I hear that you're disappointed. I understand that you wanted something different. I am still comfortable with my decision." The first few times she said those words, her body shook afterward, but each time she survived. And each time she survived, the fear became slightly smaller. She discovered that self-trust is built through evidence. You make a promise to yourself, then you keep it. You say you will rest, and you rest. You say you will save, and you save. You say you will speak honestly, and you speak. You say you will leave if a boundary is repeatedly violated, and you follow through. Every kept promise tells the nervous system, "I am here for you." Every broken promise weakens that confidence. Maya had spent years making promises to herself and then abandoning them to keep other people comfortable. She wanted to change that. She started with small promises. If she said she would go for a walk, she went. If she planned to review her finances on Sunday, she did. If she needed sleep, She protected her evening. If she wanted to have a difficult conversation, she scheduled it instead of endlessly postponing it. Small promises became evidence. Evidence became trust. Trust became freedom. She also learned not to turn self-care into another performance. There was a danger in making healing another achievement. She could imagine herself creating a perfect routine, perfect diet, perfect meditation practice, perfect relationship, perfect financial plan, and then judging herself whenever reality interrupted. That would simply recreate the same problem in a more sophisticated form. Healing did not require perfection. It required flexibility. Some days she meditated. Some days she did not. Some weeks she saved more. Other weeks an unexpected expense appeared. Sometimes she communicated beautifully. Sometimes she reacted poorly and had to apologize. Sometimes intimacy felt easy. Sometimes stress made closeness difficult. The goal was not flawless execution. The goal was returning to alignment. Progress is not the absence of getting lost. Progress is becoming better at finding your way back. Maya wrote that on the first page of a new notebook. She needed the reminder because life was becoming more complex. Her parents were aging. Friends were making different choices. Some were having children. Some were changing careers. Some were leaving long relationships. Some were buying homes. Some were starting businesses. Social comparison returned. She found herself wondering whether she was behind. Behind whom? She did not know, but the feeling was real. She looked at other people's timelines and began questioning her own. One friend had purchased a beautiful home. Another had built a successful company. Another seemed to have a perfect marriage. Another traveled constantly. Another appeared financially independent before 35. Maya felt the old pressure rising. Then she remembered that she was comparing her internal reality with other people's external presentation. She did not know their debts. Their fears, their conflicts, their private grief. Their compromises, their health, their relationship dynamics. Their reasons. She only saw the visible layer. So she returned to her own definition of enough. The question was no longer, am I ahead? It was, am I becoming more aligned with the life I actually want? Sometimes the answer was yes. Sometimes no. When the answer was no, she adjusted. No shame. Adjustment. That word became important. A plan was not a prison. If circumstances change, the plan could change. Financial goals could be revised. Career goals could evolve. Relationship expectations could mature. A person's understanding of their own desires could deepen. Maya stopped demanding that the person she had been at 25 dictate the life she would live at 30-5. People change. That was not inconsistency. It was development. She began giving herself permission to outgrow old goals. One goal had been to become indispensable at work. Now she wanted to become financially independent enough that she did not need to be indispensable. One goal had been to be desired by everyone. Now she wanted to feel comfortable being herself with the people who mattered. One goal had been to avoid conflict. Now she wanted to learn how to navigate conflict. One goal had been to never need anyone. Now she wanted healthy connection. One goal had been to accumulate enough money to feel invulnerable. Now she wanted enough money and enough resilience to respond to uncertainty. The goals looked different. So did she. One evening, Maya and her partner cooked dinner together. Nothing dramatic happened. They laughed about a mistake in the recipe. They argued briefly about whether the vegetables needed more seasoning. He teased her about how seriously she took instructions. She threw a towel at him. Later, they sat at the table talking. Maya realized that this ordinary evening contained something she had once searched for in extraordinary experiences. Presence. There was no performance. No proving. No pressure. Just two people sharing a life. She thought about how intimacy is often portrayed, intensity. Grand declarations. Passion. Drama. But mature intimacy could also be quiet, a hand reaching across the table, someone remembering how you take your tea, a partner respecting your need for sleep, a friend checking in after a difficult week, a conversation where neither person needs to win, a shared financial goal, a joke that makes sense only to the two of you, a comfortable silence. She began valuing these things more. Intensity could be beautiful, but intensity was not the same as depth. Depth required time. Consistency. Attention. Repair. Trust. She became more cautious about confusing emotional volatility with passion. A relationship that repeatedly created fear and relief could feel extraordinarily intense, but intensity could be produced by instability. Maya wanted something different. She wanted attraction with safety. Desire with choice. Closeness with autonomy. Honesty with kindness. Passion without pressure. She knew that no relationship could guarantee these qualities every moment, but they could become shared values. That was enough. She also recognized that intimacy with herself mattered even when she was alone. She had once treated solitude as evidence that something was missing. Now solitude became a place to return. She took walks alone. She ate meals without her phone. She traveled occasionally by herself. She learned to sit with her thoughts. At first, silence brought loneliness. Then it brought information. She discovered which activities she genuinely enjoyed when nobody was watching. She discovered how much of her taste had been shaped by other people's preferences. She discovered that she liked certain forms of music, certain books, certain foods, certain places simply because they made her feel alive. She discovered that pleasure did not always need an audience. That was freeing. She also became more respectful of her body. She stopped viewing her body as a project that had to be completed. Bodies change. Age changes them. Stress changes them. Illness can change them. Pregnancy can change them. Exercise changes them. Life changes them. The question was not how to freeze her body at an ideal moment. The question was how to inhabit it with less hostility. She wanted to feel rather than constantly evaluate. She wanted movement that felt energizing. Food that supported her. Sleep that restored her. Touch that felt safe. Clothing that felt comfortable. She did not stop caring about appearance. She simply stopped treating appearance the final measure of worth. That shift made her more present. She could experience her body instead of observing it from a distance. The same principle applied to intimacy. Presence mattered more than performance. She began noticing how often people become spectators of themselves. Am I doing this right? How do I look? Am I attractive enough? Am I responding correctly? Does this prove something about me? These questions pull a person away from experience. Maya practiced returning to sensation, communication, and connection. What feels comfortable? What feels uncomfortable? What do I want? What do I not want? Can I say it? Can we slow down? Can we laugh? Can we change direction? Can we stop? Can we simply be together without needing the moment to prove anything? This allowed intimacy to become less about achievement and more about relationship. She also learned that there was no universal timetable for healing. Some people progressed quickly in one area and slowly in another. Some discovered old memories later. Some needed professional support. Some needed distance from harmful environments before deeper healing could begin. Some needed medical care. Some needed community. Some needed financial stability before they could safely make other changes. Maya stopped comparing her healing to anyone else's. Her journey had its own context that mattered. She began thinking about healing as a garden rather than a machine. A machine can be repaired according to specifications. A garden requires conditions. Soil. Water. Light. Time. Protection. Attention. Different plants grow at different speeds. Some need pruning. Some need support. Some cannot survive in certain environments. Healing was similar. You could not force growth by shouting at a seed. You created conditions. Then you practice patience. That metaphor helped her become gentler. She asked not only, "What is wrong with me?" but what conditions would help me grow. The question transformed her approach to life. If she was constantly exhausted, perhaps she needed rest. If she was constantly anxious, perhaps she needed support. If she was constantly overspending, perhaps she needed a different relationship with stress. If she was constantly lonely, perhaps She needed deeper connection rather than more social activity. If she was constantly overwhelmed, perhaps she needed fewer commitments. If she was constantly ashamed, perhaps she needed compassionate understanding rather than more criticism. The solution was not always more effort. Sometimes it was a better environment. That principle influenced her financial life too. Instead of relying on willpower, she changed systems. Automatic savings reduced temptation. Separate accounts created clarity. Scheduled financial reviews prevented avoidance. A written spending plan reduced impulsive decisions. She understood that good systems make healthy behavior easier. She applied the same principle to communication. She and her partner scheduled difficult conversations when they were both rested rather than trying to solve everything late at night. They protected time together without phones. They also protected individual time. Structure created freedom. This seemed paradoxical, but Maya began to appreciate it. A financial plan could create freedom. A boundary could create closeness. A routine could create creativity. A pause could create better communication. A clear no could create a more genuine yes. The more she understood these paradoxes, the less she needed simple answers. Life could hold two truths at once. She could love someone and disagree with them. She could be grateful and still want change. She could be financially responsible and still enjoy spending. She could be independent and still need support. She could be healing and still have difficult days. She could forgive someone and still maintain distance. She could understand another person's pain without accepting harmful behavior. Complexity stopped frightening her. She began trusting herself to hold it. Then came a difficult test. A financial setback arrived unexpectedly. An expense she had not planned for disrupted the month's budget. In the past, she would have panicked, blamed herself, and perhaps avoided looking at the numbers. This time, she paused. She opened the account. She looked at the figures. She moved money from the emergency reserve. That was what the reserve was for. There was no catastrophe. There was simply an unexpected expense. She adjusted the next month's plan. The experience taught her something profound. Financial security does not mean nothing unexpected happens. It means you have built enough resilience that an unexpected event does not automatically become a crisis. She felt proud, not because the expense had been avoided, because she had responded differently. The same lesson applied emotionally. A trigger did not mean failure. A conflict did not mean the relationship was doomed. A difficult day did not mean she had returned to the beginning. The purpose of preparation was not to prevent life from happening. It was to make life more survivable. When it did, Maya began to think of resilience. Accumulated margin. Money in reserve. Skills in reserve. Time in reserve. Emotional capacity in reserve. Trusted relationships in reserve. Health practices in reserve. When something went wrong, she had somewhere to draw from. This was the opposite of living permanently at the edge. She had once used every resource she possessed, every dollar, every hour, every ounce of emotional energy. Now she wanted margin. She wanted enough left over that life could surprise her without immediately breaking her. That became one of the central principles of her life. Do not build a life that functions only when everything goes according to plan. Build one with room for reality. Reality includes illness. Reality includes conflict. Reality includes market downturns. Reality includes grief. Reality includes career changes. Reality includes fatigue. Reality includes uncertainty. A resilient life has room for these things. Maya began building that room deliberately. She strengthened her emergency fund. She diversified her skills. She invested for the long term. She protected sleep. She maintained relationships. She sought professional support when needed. She learned to say no. She kept some empty space in her calendar. She reduced unnecessary obligations. None of these actions looked dramatic. Together they changed her life. One morning she realized that she no longer woke up with the immediate feeling that she was behind. There was still work. There were still goals. There were still uncertainties, but the internal race had slowed. She had stopped running toward a finish line nobody had actually defined. Instead, She was building. Slowly. Intentionally. She thought about all the advice she had heard over the years. Work harder. Be more attractive. Earn more. Find the right person. Buy the right things. Become successful. Avoid failure. She now wanted to replace those commands with different ones. Know yourself. Protect your boundaries. Learn to communicate. Build financial margin. Invest patiently. Choose relationships based on character. Treat your body with respect. Ask for help when needed. Do not confuse intensity with intimacy. Do not confuse wealth with worth. Do not confuse discomfort with danger. Do not confuse another person's disappointment with your wrongdoing. And above all, do not abandon yourself in exchange for temporary approval. That last principle felt like the thread connecting everything. Money. Relationships. Healing. Career. Body. Sexuality. Friendship. All of them involved choices about whether she would remain connected to herself. She had once thought self-abandonment was the price of belonging. Now she understood that belonging without authenticity was expensive. It costs peace. It costs energy. It costs time. Sometimes it costs money. Sometimes it cost years. The cost was too high. She wanted a different kind of life, one in which belonging began with herself. She did not mean isolation. She meant internal belonging, the feeling that wherever she went, she could remain on her own side. She could disagree with herself without hating herself. She could make mistakes without becoming her mistake. She could change her mind without calling herself unstable. She could want more without declaring what she had insufficient. She could want less without apologizing. She could love another person without making them responsible for her entire identity. She could pursue financial independence without making wealth her religion. She could experience desire without turning desire into obligation. She could feel fear without making fear the leader. That was the freedom she had been searching for. Not freedom from being human. Freedom to be human without constantly turning against herself. As the months passed, Maya noticed that people began responding differently to her. Some trusted her more because her words and actions aligned. Some respected her boundaries. Some disappeared because they preferred the older version of her. She grieved the losses. Healing did not make loss painless. It made grief more honest. She allowed herself to miss people without pretending they were good for her. She could remember beautiful moments without using them as evidence that she should return. She could appreciate what a relationship had taught her without needing it to continue. This became another form of emotional maturity. A chapter can have value even when it ends. A relationship can matter even when it cannot continue. A job can teach you even if you eventually leave it. A mistake can become meaningful without becoming something you repeat. A difficult season can shape you without defining you. Maya began to see her past not as a prison, but as a source of information. She could look backward without living backward, and she could look forward without demanding certainty. One night, she wrote another sentence in her notebook. I want my future to be built from values, not fear. She underlined it. Then she added, let money support the life. Let relationships enrich the life. Let healing protect the life, but let the life itself belong to me. She read the words several times. For the first time, they felt true. She understood that no amount of knowledge could guarantee an easy future. No financial strategy could eliminate every risk. No relationship could promise permanent certainty. No healing process could prevent every trigger. But she no longer needed guarantees. She had learned to build capacity. And capacity changes the way uncertainty feels. The future was still unknown, but Maya was no longer meeting it as the frightened woman who had once believed she needed everyone else's approval to survive. She was meeting it as someone who could listen, someone who could choose, someone who could save, someone who could speak, someone who could leave, someone who could stay, someone who could love, someone who could rest, someone who could begin again. She closed the notebook and turned off the light. There would be more lessons. There would be setbacks. There would be days when old fears returned. There would be moments when she forgot everything she had learned. But she had discovered something that made forgetting less frightening. She could remember again. She could return. She could practice. And perhaps that was what real transformation looked like, not becoming a person who never struggled, but becoming a person who no longer believed that struggle meant she was broken. Maya fell asleep that night without needing to solve the future. For once, tomorrow could arrive without being forced into a plan. She had enough. Not everything. Not certainty. Not perfection. Enough money to breathe. Enough self-trust to choose. Enough courage to speak. Enough boundaries to protect herself. Enough tenderness to remain open. Enough wisdom to know that she would keep learning. And enough freedom to understand that her life did not need to be impressive to be deeply worthwhile. By the time Maya entered the next season of her life, she had stopped thinking of healing as something she would eventually finish. There was no final morning when she would wake up completely free of fear, perfectly confident, perfectly connected, and permanently certain about every decision. The more she learned, the more she understood that being human meant remaining responsive to change. What mattered was not reaching some imagined state of permanent completion, but developing a relationship with herself that could survive uncertainty. She had learned to listen when her body whispered before it had to shout. She had learned to distinguish a genuine need from an old fear. She had learned that a boundary could be an act of care rather than rejection. She had learned that money could create options without creating worth. She had learned that intimacy was not a performance and that love did not require surrendering her identity. Yet perhaps her most important lesson was still unfolding. Freedom becomes meaningful only when you use it to build something. For years, Maya had thought freedom meant getting away from things, away from unhealthy relationships, away from financial anxiety, away from exhausting work, away from shame, away from expectations, away from old identities. Now she was beginning to understand freedom differently. Freedom was not merely escape. It was the capacity to move towards something chosen. There was a profound difference between running away and walking toward a life that reflected your values. The first could be fueled by fear. The second required vision. She had spent enough time looking backward. It was time to ask what she wanted to create. The question was more difficult than she expected, because creating required vulnerability of a different kind. Healing had taught her to protect herself. Building required her to risk herself again. If she started a project, it could fail. If she pursued a new professional direction, she could discover that she was not as capable as she hoped. If she invested money, markets could fall. If she opened herself more deeply in love, she could be hurt. If she expressed a dream publicly, someone could laugh at it. Protection had a familiar logic. Minimize risk. Creation had another logic. Accept meaningful risk in service of something valuable. Maya began to see that courage was not the absence of caution. It was the ability to decide which risks were worth taking. She wrote another sentence in her notebook. Do not eliminate every risk. Learn to distinguish destructive risk from meaningful risk. That principle changed her financial life. She had become more conservative after seeing how easily fear could influence her. She saved consistently, avoided unnecessary debt, and built reserves. Those habits were useful. But she realized that financial security could become another form of avoidance if she waited for absolute certainty before investing in her future. There would never be a perfect moment. Education costs money. Changing careers might temporarily reduce income. Starting something new required time. Even staying exactly where she was carried risk, because the world itself changed. She began thinking in terms of calculated experiments. Instead of quitting her job impulsively, she could develop a skill while maintaining income. Instead of investing everything into one idea, she could begin with a manageable amount. Instead of making a dramatic career transformation overnight, she could test a new direction through part-time work, study, networking, and small projects. Instead of demanding certainty from herself, she could gather evidence. This was a new kind of confidence. Confidence was no longer "I know this will work." It became "I can learn whether this works." That distinction was enormous. She began taking small steps toward a project she had imagined for years. She wanted to create something that combined her professional skills with the lessons she had learned about emotional well-being and financial resilience. She did not know exactly what form it would eventually take. She only knew that she wanted to help people feel more capable of making deliberate choices in their lives. The old Maya would have waited until she had the perfect plan. The new Maya began with a question: who am I trying to help? She spent weeks listening. She spoke with people. She asked about their frustrations. She paid attention to the language they used. She noticed that many people did not lack information. They lacked systems, confidence, emotional space, and the ability to translate information into action. Someone knew they should save, but could not stop spending whenever they felt overwhelmed. Someone knew they needed boundaries, but feared disappointing everyone. Someone wanted a healthier relationship, but confused anxiety with attraction. Someone wanted to leave an exhausting job, but felt financially trapped. Someone wanted to care for their body, but had spent years criticizing it. The problems were interconnected. People often treated financial stress, relationship stress, and emotional stress as separate categories. Maya had begun to see them as overlapping systems. A person who constantly felt unsafe might seek certainty through money. A person who felt financially trapped might remain in a relationship that no longer felt healthy. A person who struggled with self-worth might overspend to signal success. A person who felt ashamed of their body might withdraw from intimacy. A person who feared conflict might avoid negotiating salary and then feel financially resentful. Human beings did not live in separate compartments. Everything touched everything else. Maya did not want to pretend she had solved all of it. She simply wanted to share what she was learning. She started small, a private workshop. Then a short presentation, then a group conversation. She was terrified before the first one. Her hands shook. Her mouth felt dry. She wondered whether people would think she was pretending to know more than she did. Then she remembered a principle she had learned through therapy and life experience. You do not need to be the finished version of yourself to be useful. You need to be honest about where you are and responsible about what you offer. That distinction protected her from pretending. She did not present herself as someone who had mastered life. She presented herself as someone who had learned certain principles through experience, study, reflection, and practice. She encouraged people to seek qualified professional help for problems beyond the scope of general education. She talked about financial principles without pretending to predict markets. She talked about relationships without claiming that one formula worked for everyone. She talked about healing without promising quick results. Her honesty made the work stronger. People responded. After one session, a woman approached her. I thought my problem was that I didn't know enough. The woman said, but I think my problem is that I don't trust myself to act on what I already know. Maya smiled. I understand that. The woman laughed. Of course you do. The conversation stayed with Maya for days. How many people were waiting for more information when what they actually needed was practice. Information could become another form of avoidance. Read one more book. Watch one more video. Take one more course. Find one more strategy. Then act. Maya had done this herself. She had consumed information because information felt safe. Action created uncertainty. Now she wanted to help people move from knowledge to practice. She created a simple principle: information changes what you know. Repeated action changes what you can do. The distinction became central to her work. If someone wanted financial stability, knowing that saving mattered was not enough. They needed a system. If someone wanted stronger boundaries, knowing that boundaries mattered was not enough. They needed to practice saying no. If someone wanted healthier intimacy, knowing that communication mattered was not enough. They needed to communicate when it was uncomfortable. If someone wanted emotional resilience, understanding their triggers was not enough. They needed strategies for responding when those triggers appeared. Practice was where transformation happened. Maya also became more aware of the danger of all or nothing thinking. People often believed that if they could not make a huge change, There was no point making a small one. If they could not save a large amount, they saved nothing. If they could not exercise perfectly, they did nothing. If they could not communicate flawlessly, they avoided the conversation. If they could not completely heal, they decided they were failing. Maya had lived that way. She now preferred minimum viable progress. What is the smallest action that moves this in a healthier direction? Save a little, walk for 10 minutes, send the honest message, schedule the appointment, review one account. Practice one boundary. Take one evening off. Ask one question. The action might seem insignificant, but consistency changes scale. She thought about a stone being moved 1 inch at a time. The distance did not look impressive in any single moment, but over months, direction mattered. Small actions become powerful when they are aligned and repeated. This became one of the principles she shared most often. She also warned herself against turning consistency into rigidity. Life interrupts plans. Illness happens. Emergencies happen. Care responsibilities happen. Grief happens. Sometimes the right action is to stop. A healthy system needs flexibility. Maya's financial plan reflected this. Her emergency fund existed partly because life was unpredictable. Her schedule included buffers because not every day could be optimized. Her relationships included room for difficult seasons. Her personal goals had ranges rather than rigid deadlines. She had stopped trying to optimize every minute. Optimization had once seemed like freedom. Eventually, it had begun to feel like surveillance. Was this the most productive use of my time? Was this the best financial decision? Was this the healthiest meal? Was this the ideal relationship response? Was I improving fast enough? She became exhausted by her own measurement. Now she wanted direction, rather than constant optimization. A compass, not a stopwatch. The compass asked whether she was moving toward her values. It did not demand that every step be perfect. This changed her relationship with rest. Rest was no longer something she had to earn by becoming sufficiently productive. Rest was part of the system. She noticed how much creativity returned when she stopped treating exhaustion as a badge of honor. Some of her best ideas arrived during walks. Some of her clearest relationship insights appeared while washing dishes. Some financial decisions became easier after she slept. Her mind needed unstructured space. She began protecting it. The more she rested, the more she noticed how deeply productivity culture had influenced her identity. She had been trained to ask what she could produce. Now she asked what she could experience. What could she notice? What could she learn? Who could she love? What could she create? What could she enjoy? What could she contribute? These were not anti-work questions. They were life questions. Work was one part of life. Money was one tool. Relationships were one dimension. Health was one foundation. None of them needed to become the whole identity. Maya became particularly protective of this balance because she had seen how easily people can replace one obsession with another. Someone leaves a toxic relationship and becomes obsessed with self-improvement. Someone escapes financial insecurity and becomes obsessed with wealth. Someone discovers mindfulness and turns it into another performance. Someone learns about boundaries and begins treating every inconvenience as a violation. Someone learns about independence and rejects every form of dependence. The goal was not to move from one extreme to another. The goal was integration. Maya wanted to be both independent and connected, disciplined and playful, financially responsible and generous, ambitious and rested, vulnerable and boundaried, sexually expressive and respectful of limits, confident and willing to learn. She did not want one quality to erase another. This became especially important in her intimate relationship. As they became more secure, Maya noticed a new challenge: familiarity. Early attraction often contains novelty. Long-term intimacy requires intentional attention because novelty naturally decreases when two people know each other's routines. Maya did not interpret this as evidence that something was wrong. Instead, she became curious. How do we continue discovering each other? People change, preferences change, bodies change, stress changes, responsibilities change, desires change. A relationship that assumes people will remain exactly as they were at the beginning eventually becomes a museum rather than a living partnership. Maya and her partner began asking each other questions they might once have considered unnecessary. What has changed for you lately? What are you enjoying? What has been difficult? Where do you want more space? Where do you want more connection? What are you afraid to say because you think I'll react badly? What are you curious about? Some conversations were awkward. That was okay. The purpose was not to create perfect intimacy. It was to keep discovering. Maya realized that curiosity protects relationships from assumption. When we assume we already know someone, we stop asking. When we stop asking, we start projecting. When we project, we respond to an imagined person. Curiosity brings us back to the actual human being. This principle applied herself to. She could not assume that what she wanted 5 years ago was what she wanted now. So she kept asking, what do I need? What matters? What am I avoiding? What am I ready for? What am I not ready for? What feels alive? What feels forced? The answers changed. That was not a problem. It was life. She became more comfortable with changing her mind. A decision made honestly at one point could become inappropriate later. Changing it did not mean the original decision was foolish. Circumstances changed. Information changed. She changed. The ability to update was a strength. She applied this to financial planning too. A portfolio strategy should reflect goals, time horizon, risk tolerance, and changing circumstances. A budget should change when income changes. An emergency fund should be reconsidered as responsibilities grow. Insurance needs can change. Career plans can change. Financial freedom required not only discipline, but review. A plan that never changes may not be a plan. It may be an attachment. Maya scheduled quarterly reviews. What is working? What is not? What changed? What needs adjustment? What should we stop doing? The last question was often the most valuable. People loved adding. More investments. More goals. More projects. More subscriptions. More commitments. But subtraction created freedom. Cancel what no longer matters. Stop paying for what you don't use. Leave the project that drains more than it creates. Decline the invitation. Release the identity that no longer fits. Reduce the possessions that require maintenance. Stop the conversation when it becomes abusive. Sometimes wealth was created by accumulation. Sometimes freedom was created by subtraction. Maya began thinking of her life as an ecosystem. Everything required resources. Every commitment consumed time. Every possession consumed space. Every relationship consumed attention. Every financial obligation consumed future income. Every unresolved conflict consumed mental energy. The question was not whether these things were good or bad. The question was whether they were worth the resources they required. That question made her more selective. She stopped agreeing automatically. She started asking for time before making commitments. I'll think about it and get back to you. That sentence became one of her favorite boundaries. It prevented pressure from becoming a decision. She realized that many poor choices were made under artificial urgency. By now, decide now, answer now, commit now, react now. But important decisions rarely became wiser simply because they were rushed. Maya learned to create space. Space revealed whether she genuinely wanted something or merely wanted relief from pressure. This became especially useful when dealing with money. Sales tactics often create urgency. Limited time. Last chance. Only a few remaining. Everyone is buying. Maya became comfortable walking away. If I cannot afford to think, I cannot afford the decision. She smiled the first time she wrote that down. It was true beyond shopping. If a career offer required immediate agreement, without reasonable time to evaluate, she became cautious. If a relationship demanded immediate commitment, she slowed down. If an investment opportunity depended on panic and fear of missing out, she stepped back. If someone demanded an immediate emotional response, she breathed. Urgency was not always a warning sign, but artificial urgency deserved examination. Maya began seeing patience, a financial and emotional superpower. Patience allowed compound growth. Patience allowed trust to develop. Patience allowed information to arrive. Patience allowed emotions to settle. Patience allowed relationships to reveal character. Patience allowed skills to deepen. But patience did not mean passivity. Waiting for clarity was different from avoiding action. Maya learned to distinguish them. If she had enough information and the next step was clear, she acted. If she was confused because she was afraid, she examined the fear. If she was confused because information was missing, she gathered information. If she was confused because the choice itself was ambiguous, she accepted uncertainty. This was practical wisdom. Not every question has a perfect answer. Sometimes the options are both reasonable. Then you choose. And once you choose, you make the choice work. That last idea changed her relationship with regret. She had spent years wondering whether every decision was the correct one. Now she asked a different question. Given what I knew at the time, was this a reasonable choice? If yes, she could stop punishing herself for the outcome. Good decisions can produce bad outcomes. Bad decisions can occasionally produce good outcomes. Outcome alone cannot determine decision quality. This principle protected her from hindsight. She used it in investing. A diversified long-term strategy could experience a downturn. That did not automatically mean the strategy was foolish. She used it in relationships. A relationship could end despite both people behaving with care. That did not automatically mean the relationship had been a mistake. She used it in career choices. A thoughtful job decision could still lead to unexpected circumstances. That did not mean she had failed. Life contained randomness. Accepting that did not make her careless. It made her realistic. Maya's financial confidence grew because she stopped demanding certainty from markets. She focused on what she could control. Savings rate. Cost. Diversification. Time horizon. Debt management. Skill development. Earning capacity. Behavior during volatility. She could not control headlines. She could control whether headlines caused her to panic. She could not control market returns. She could control whether she had a plan. She could not control another person's financial choices. She could control her own agreements and boundaries. This distinction became one of her favorite frameworks. Put your energy where your influence is strongest. She applied it everywhere. You cannot control whether someone approves of you. You can control whether you behave according to your values. You cannot control whether someone stays. You can control whether you remain honest. You cannot control the market. You can control your financial habits. You cannot control whether your body changes. You can control how you care for it. You cannot control whether the past happened. You can control what meaning you give it and what you do next. This was not about pretending everything was controllable. It was the opposite. It was about accepting what was not. Acceptance gave her energy. Energy gave her choice. Choice created movement. Movement created change. Maya also became more aware of how people sometimes use self-improvement to avoid grief. She had done this. Instead of grieving, she analyzed. Instead of crying, she researched. Instead of resting, she planned. Instead of admitting she missed someone, she created a new goal. Healing required space for emotions that could not be optimized. Some pain simply needed to be felt. One evening, she received news that a person she had once loved was going through a difficult period. The news brought memories back. She felt sadness, tenderness, anger, and nostalgia all at once. Her first instinct was to turn the experience into a lesson. Then she stopped. Maybe she did not need a lesson. Maybe she just needed to grieve. She sat by the window. She cried. She remembered. She allowed herself to miss what had been beautiful without rewriting what had been harmful. That was difficult. People often romanticize the past because memory preserves highlights and softens complexity. Maya practiced remembering the whole picture. There had been love. There had also been incompatibility. There had been tenderness, There had also been moments that hurt. There had been meaningful experiences. There had also been reasons she left. Both could be true. She did not need to turn the past into either a perfect romance or a complete mistake. It could simply be a chapter. She whispered, "I can be grateful for what was without going back." The sentence brought peace. This ability to hold complexity became one of the clearest signs of her growth. She no longer needed villains to justify boundaries. Sometimes a person could be good and still not be good for her. Sometimes the people could love each other and still be unable to build a healthy life together. Sometimes leaving was not punishment, it was recognition. That realization made her less judgmental. It also made her more decisive. She no longer waited for someone to become terrible before allowing herself to leave. Compatibility mattered. Values mattered. Safety mattered. Mutuality mattered. She did not need courtroom evidence. Her own experience was information. This principle extended into work. She did not need a workplace to become abusive before deciding it was not aligned with her values. She could leave because the environment was draining her. She did not need to justify the decision by proving that everyone else was wrong. The ability to leave without demonizing was a form of freedom. Maya began understanding that financial independence made this freedom more practical. Money could not solve every problem, but money could create options. Savings could create time. Skills could create mobility. Low fixed expenses could create flexibility. Diversified income could reduce dependence on one source. A strong professional network could create opportunities. Financial literacy could reduce fear. She became increasingly interested in what she called option wealth. Option wealth was not simply having a large number in an account. It was having choices. Could you reduce hours? Could you change jobs? Could you relocate? Could you take a break? Could you support a family member? Could you handle an emergency? Could you say no to a bad opportunity? The greater your financial margin, the more choices become possible. But Maya also recognized the limit. You can become so obsessed with maximizing future options that you sacrifice the present entirely. That was another trap. Save every dollar. Work every hour. Delay every pleasure. Wait for retirement. Then discover that life happened while you were preparing for it. She did not want that. She wanted present enjoyment and future security to coexist. So she created a rule. Build tomorrow without abandoning today. She saved. She invested. She planned. And she also traveled occasionally, enjoyed meals with friends, bought books, took afternoons off, and celebrated small victories. Money was meant to support life, not replace it. The same principle applied to healing. She did not want to spend the rest of her life analyzing herself. At some point, healing had to become living. Laughing. Creating. Loving. Working. Resting. Exploring. Failing. Trying again. She wanted to move beyond constantly asking, "What is wrong with me?" and spend more time asking, "What can I build with the person I am becoming?" That question opened a new chapter. She began developing her project more seriously. She created a small body of work. She learned about communication, presentation, business structure, and responsible financial planning. She made mistakes. Her first offer was too complicated. Her pricing was unclear. She underestimated the time required. She overprepared in some areas and underprepared in others. But she did not interpret mistakes as evidence that she should stop. She treated them as data. This was a major shift. The old Maya had used mistakes as identity statements. I failed, therefore I am a failure. The new Maya used mistakes as feedback. This did not work. What does that tell me? That question created momentum. She revised. Simplified. Tested again. The project slowly improved. She also learned that earning money ethically required creating real value. She did not want to manipulate fear. She did not want to sell impossible promises. She did not want to turn people's vulnerabilities into a business model. She wanted the work to be useful enough that people would willingly pay for it. That became another financial principle. Long-term wealth is easier to build when the value you create is real, repeatable, and trusted. Trust became an economic asset. A reputation could take years to build and minutes to damage. Maya wanted her work to reflect the same values she practiced personally. Transparency, boundaries, evidence, humility, practicality. She refused to pretend she could guarantee outcomes. People's lives were too complex for guarantees. Instead, she offered frameworks and tools. The responsibility remained with each person to decide what was appropriate. That approach attracted fewer people than dramatic promises might have. But the people who stayed were more engaged. Maya realized she was building something sustainable. Not explosive. Sustainable. She began to appreciate sustainability in every area. A relationship that requires constant emotional intensity is exhausting. A financial plan that requires constant restriction is fragile. A work schedule that requires constant exhaustion is unsustainable. A healing routine that demands perfection will eventually collapse. A sustainable life leaves room for being human. That became her standard. Can I keep doing this? Can this survive a difficult month? Can this work when I am tired? Can this relationship survive disagreement? Can this financial plan survive an unexpected expense? Can this career survive a change in the market? Can this healing practice survive a bad week? If the answer was no, she redesigned the system. She no longer admired extremes. She admired resilience. One evening, Maya and her partner sat on the balcony after dinner. The city lights were beginning to appear as darkness settled around them. Do you think you've changed? He asked. She smiled. Completely. How? She thought about it. I used to believe that becoming stronger meant needing less, and now, I think becoming stronger means being able to choose what I need, without being ashamed of needing it. He nodded. That's a big difference. It is. She looked out over the lights. I used to think freedom meant nobody could affect me, and now I think freedom means people can matter to me without controlling me. He reached for her hand. She took it. There was no grand declaration, just warmth. Maya realized that this was what she had been building all along. Not invulnerability. Relationship with herself, with money. With work, with her body, with intimacy. With uncertainty, with other people. With time. The relationships were not separate. They influenced one another. When she felt financially secure, she had more room to make healthy relationship choices. When she communicated better, she experienced less emotional stress. When she rested, she made better decisions. When she respected her body, she became more present. When she trusted herself, she needed less external validation. When she needed less validation, she spent less energy performing. When she spent less energy performing, she had more energy to create. Everything connected. The lesson was not to perfect every area simultaneously. It was to recognize the system. One improvement could support another. One unhealthy pattern could affect several areas. That awareness made her compassionate, but strategic. If she felt overwhelmed, she did not immediately ask which goal to add. She asked what burden could be removed. If she felt financially anxious, she did not automatically seek a higher return. She asked whether her expenses, savings, debt, and expectations were aligned. If she felt disconnected in her relationship, she did not automatically seek more romance. She asked whether they had enough time, honesty, rest, and attention. If she felt ashamed of herself, she did not automatically seek more achievement. She asked whether she was judging herself by a standard she had never consciously chosen. These questions created space. And space created choice. Maya was beginning to understand that the deepest form of freedom might not be having more possibilities. It might be having enough inner stability to choose among them without being driven by fear. That was what she wanted to protect. She knew the future would test her. There would be losses. There would be financial surprises. There would be relationship conflicts. There would be professional disappointments. There would be days when old fears returned. But she had stopped seeing these possibilities as reasons to avoid living. Life could not be made safe enough to eliminate vulnerability. It could only be made meaningful enough that vulnerability became worthwhile. Maya opened her notebook one final time that evening. She wrote, "I cannot control what life will bring. I can influence the conditions in which I meet it." Then she wrote beneath it, "Build savings, but also build skills. Build boundaries, but also build trust. Build independence, but also build community. Build intimacy, but keep your identity. Build ambition, but protect your health. Build a future, but remain present. Enough to live today." She looked at the page. The principles did not feel like instructions anymore. They felt like a philosophy. Way of walking through the world. She closed the notebook. The next morning she would continue working on her project. She would review her finances. She would answer a difficult email. She would go for a walk. She would probably make a mistake. She would probably learn something. She would probably laugh. And somewhere along the way, she knew another unexpected lesson would appear, because life was not a problem she needed to solve. It was a relationship she needed to participate in. She had spent years trying to become someone who could never be hurt. Now she was becoming someone who could be hurt and still remain present. Someone who could lose and still rebuild. Someone who could love and still have boundaries. Someone who could earn and still remember what money was for. Someone who could desire without abandoning choice. Someone who could rest without guilt. Someone who could change without apology. Someone who could say, "I don't know," without panic. Someone who could say, "I need help," without shame. Someone who could say, "No," without believing she had become cruel. Someone who could say, "Yes," without wondering whether she was giving away too much. That was not perfection. It was maturity. And maturity, Maya was discovering, was less about becoming certain, and more about becoming trustworthy to yourself. The world did not need her to have every answer, neither did she. She needed to keep listening. Keep learning. Keep adjusting. Keep choosing. Keep returning. The future was waiting, not as a promise. Not as a guarantee. As an invitation. And this time, Maya was ready to answer it as herself. The invitation did not arrive as a dramatic opportunity. There was no announcement, no sudden transformation, no single moment when the world seemed to open its doors and declare that Maya had finally become the person she had been trying to become. It arrived quietly, almost invisibly, in the form of an ordinary morning. Sunlight moved across the floor. A kettle began to whistle. Her phone remained face down on the table. For once, she did not feel compelled to reach for it immediately. She stood beside the window and watched the city wake up. Cars moved through the streets. People hurried toward offices, trains, schools, shops, appointments, responsibilities. Everyone appeared to be carrying an invisible collection of hopes and fears. Maya smiled because she knew that she was carrying hers too. The difference was that she no longer believed she had to carry them perfectly. She had once imagined that freedom would feel like certainty. She thought that if she could understand herself completely, become financially secure enough, heal every wound, establish perfect boundaries, and create the right relationship, fear would finally disappear. She now knew better. Fear had not disappeared. It had changed its position. Instead of sitting in the driver's seat, it sat beside her. Sometimes it spoke loudly. Sometimes it made convincing arguments. Sometimes it predicted disasters with remarkable creativity. But Maya had learned that hearing fear was not the same as obeying it. She poured her coffee and opened the notebook that had followed her through, so many difficult seasons. Its pages were filled with questions, calculations, promises, mistakes, observations, and sentences written during moments when she had needed to remind herself who she wanted to be. She turned through the pages slowly. They were old financial goals that had already been reached. There were relationship boundaries that once seemed impossible, but had eventually become ordinary. There were plans she had abandoned. There were ideas she had revised. There were names she had once written with pain and now remembered with tenderness. There were pages filled with anger. Others were filled with gratitude. Some contained nothing but a single sentence. She stopped at one of those sentences. I don't have to become fearless. I have to become trustworthy to myself. She remembered when she had written it. She had been sitting on the floor after a difficult conversation, convinced that she had ruined everything by finally speaking honestly. Her body had been trembling. She had wanted to apologize simply for having needs. Yet she had stayed with herself. She had allowed the discomfort to exist without immediately repairing it for someone else. That night had changed something. Now, years later, she understood that self-trust had not been created by affirmations alone. It had been built through evidence. Every time she told herself she would do something and followed through, the relationship strengthened. Every time she set a boundary and honored it, the relationship strengthened. Every time she made a mistake and responded with accountability rather than cruelty, the relationship strengthened. Every time she acknowledged uncertainty without inventing a false answer, the relationship strengthened. Self-trust was not a feeling she had waited to receive. It was a relationship she had practiced. That realization became the foundation of the final stage of her journey. Maya began asking a different question about almost everything. Will this make me more dependent on fear or more capable of choice? The question applied to money. It applied to love. It applied to work. It applied to health. It applied to desire. It applied to time. She discovered that many decisions that looked unrelated were actually connected by the same underlying principle: agency. Financial agency meant understanding where her money went, building reserves, controlling unnecessary obligations, increasing her earning capacity, and making long-term decisions instead of constantly reacting to short-term pressure. Emotional agency meant noticing feelings without automatically turning them into commands. Relational agency meant knowing that love did not remove the right to say no. Professional agency meant building skills valuable enough that her options did not depend entirely on one employer. Physical agency meant treating her body something she inhabited rather than something she displayed. Sexual agency meant recognizing that desire, consent, curiosity, comfort, and boundaries belong together. Maya no longer saw these as separate forms of freedom. They were different expressions of the same capacity, the ability to participate in her life consciously. She had learned, however, that agency was not the same as control. That distinction was crucial. She could influence her finances, but she could not control markets. She could communicate clearly, but she could not control another person's response. She could care for her body, but she could not control aging. She could choose healthy relationships, but she could not guarantee that nobody would ever hurt her. She could build skills, but she could not control the economy. She could make careful decisions, but she could not eliminate uncertainty. Control demanded certainty. Agency operated inside uncertainty. Maya preferred agency. It was more realistic. One afternoon, she received an email that reminded her of how far she had come. A company she had once admired offered her a position. The compensation was excellent, the title was impressive. The work would look wonderful on paper. For a moment, the old hunger returned. This is proof. The thought appeared almost automatically. Proof that you made it. Proof that you are successful. Proof that all the difficult years meant something. She read the offer again. Then she read the details. The position would require nearly constant availability. Travel would be frequent. The culture was aggressive. The people seemed brilliant, but exhausted. The compensation would be higher, but her fixed costs would also likely increase because of the lifestyle expected around the role. She calculated the financial difference. It was significant. Then she calculated something less visible. Time. Energy. Health. Relationship capacity. Creative freedom. The decision became clear. She declined. There was no dramatic sense of victory. She simply felt aligned. She had reached a point where more money was not automatically more wealth. Sometimes wealth meant keeping the time that money would have purchased. Sometimes the highest return investment was protecting the ability to think. Sometimes a lower income with lower expenses and greater autonomy created more practical freedom than a higher income attached to permanent exhaustion. Maya wrote another principle. Income is what you receive. Freedom is what your resources allow you to choose. She knew this did not mean everyone should reject higher-paying work. Higher income could be enormously valuable. It could accelerate savings, support family, fund education, and create opportunities. The lesson was not to romanticize less money. It was to understand the full economics of a decision. A salary had a number. A lifestyle had a cost. A job had a compensation package. It also had a time package, stress package, health package, and opportunity cost package. The mature decision considered the whole picture. This way of thinking gave Maya a calmer relationship with ambition. She still wanted to earn more. She still wanted to become excellent. She still wanted to create something valuable. But she wanted growth without self-destruction. She wanted success that could be lived inside. That phrase became important. Success you can live inside. Not success that looks impressive from a distance while making the person inside it miserable. She began teaching this principle to the people who attended her workshops. She told them that financial freedom did not necessarily begin with becoming rich. It often began with reducing the distance between what you earn, what you need, and what you value. Someone earning a large income but spending every dollar could have less freedom than someone earning less while maintaining low obligations and a strong savings habit. Someone with substantial assets but no time might feel trapped. Someone with modest resources but strong skills, low fixed costs, supportive relationships, and flexibility might feel unexpectedly rich. Freedom had dimensions. Money was one. Time was another. Health was another. Relationships were another. Skills were another. Maya began encouraging people to think in terms of resilience rather than appearances. Could your life absorb a surprise? Could you survive a temporary loss of income? Could you leave a harmful environment? Could you take a month to recover if necessary? Could you support someone you loved? Could you say no? Could you change direction? These questions became more meaningful to her than status symbols. She also became careful about debt. Debt was not inherently evil. Used thoughtfully, it could finance education, productive assets, or other meaningful goals. But debt that existed primarily to support an identity could become a quiet prison. She had seen people purchase lifestyles before they could afford them because they feared appearing unsuccessful. The monthly payment was not merely a financial number. It was a claim on future freedom. Maya began saying, every recurring obligation is a decision about your future time. A subscription, a loan, a luxury apartment, a car payment, a lifestyle expectation. Each one might be perfectly reasonable, but each one reduced flexibility. The goal was not to eliminate every commitment. The goal was to choose commitments consciously. That philosophy also changed how she approached possessions. She had once bought things to become a certain kind of person. The right clothes, the right furniture. The right technology. The right experiences. Now she asked a simpler question. Will this add genuine value to my life? Sometimes the answer was yes. She still enjoyed beautiful things. She still bought objects that delighted her, but she no longer expected objects to complete an identity. She wanted possessions to serve life rather than define it. The same principle applied to social media. She reduced the amount of time she spent watching carefully edited versions of other people's lives. She noticed how comparison affected her nervous system. Someone's vacation became evidence that she was not traveling enough. Someone's engagement became evidence that she was behind. Someone's business success became evidence that she was wasting time. Someone's appearance became evidence that she was not attractive enough. Someone's home became evidence that she had failed financially. The comparisons were endless because the internet offered an infinite supply of people against whom she could measure herself. She chose limits. Not because every platform was harmful, but because she had learned that attention was a resource. What you repeatedly watch influences what you repeatedly want. That meant attention was part of financial and emotional freedom. If an industry could profit by convincing her that she was inadequate, she wanted to understand the mechanism before accepting the message. She became more conscious of advertising. Many businesses do not sell products alone. They sell identities. Buy this and become successful. Wear this and become desirable. Drive this and become important. Live here and become sophisticated. Use this and become healthy. Maya did not reject commerce. She simply became harder to manipulate. She asked, "What problem is this product actually solving? What emotion is the advertisement trying to create? Would I want this if nobody knew I owned it? Does this purchase support my values?" Sometimes she still bought it. The difference was choice. That was enough. Her relationship with desire had changed too. She no longer treated every desire as either something to obey or something to suppress. Desire could be information. It could reveal curiosity, attraction, need. Novelty. Longing. Playfulness. Sometimes it revealed an unmet emotional need. Sometimes it was simply desire. She learned to pause before turning desire into action. What am I actually wanting? The answer was not always obvious. Sometimes she wanted closeness, sometimes reassurance, sometimes novelty, sometimes rest, sometimes to feel seen. Sometimes to feel powerful. Sometimes to escape boredom. The pause gave her options. She could meet the underlying need in a healthier way. This became particularly meaningful in intimate relationships. Maya had once believed that good intimacy required spontaneity and intensity. Now she understood that intimacy also required communication, safety, curiosity, and the freedom to change one's mind. She did not want either partner to perform a role. She wanted the people to remain present enough to notice each other. Sometimes closeness was passionate. Sometimes it was gentle. Sometimes one person wanted connection while the other needed rest. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply held each other. The quality of intimacy was not measured by how dramatic the moment was. It was measured by how honestly they could inhabit it. Maya had learned something else that mattered deeply. Consent was not merely a moment of permission. Healthy intimacy involved ongoing communication and respect for changing comfort. A yes could become a no. A no could later become a yes. Uncertainty could mean pause. Silence was not something to interpret as automatic agreement. Curiosity could be expressed without pressure. Desire could be communicated without entitlement. These principles made intimacy safer and more alive. Maya also learned to speak about pleasure without shame. She believed adults deserved accurate, respectful information about their bodies and relationships, but she also understood that no educational framework could dictate exactly what another person should want. Individual differences mattered. Culture mattered. History mattered. Health mattered. Relationship dynamics mattered. What mattered most was that people had room to understand themselves without coercion. She wanted to replace performance with presence. Instead of asking, "Am I good enough?" she encouraged a different question. Are we connected, comfortable, curious, and able to communicate? The question shifted attention away from judgment and toward relationship. Maya found that this philosophy also helped people with financial decisions. Instead of asking, "Am I good with money?" she suggested asking, "Does my money behavior reflect what I value?" A person could earn a lot and still feel financially chaotic. Another could earn modestly and be remarkably intentional. The goal was not to create a universal lifestyle. It was to create alignment. Maya began using the word alignment more carefully. Alignment did not mean every part of life looked harmonious. It meant important choices generally pointed in the same direction. If she valued health, her schedule needed to leave room for sleep. If she valued relationships, her calendar needed to contain time for people. If she valued independence, her finances needed margin. If she valued creativity, her life needed unstructured attention. If she valued honesty, she needed relationships where honesty was survivable. Values require infrastructure. This was one of the most practical lessons she had learned. You cannot merely claim that something matters. You must give it resources, time, money, attention, energy. If someone says family is important, but gives family whatever time remains after everything else, the calendar tells a different story. If someone says financial freedom matters, but spends every raise immediately, behavior tells a different story. If someone says health matters, but treats sleep as optional, the system tells a different story. Maya began looking at behavior as information, not evidence for shame. Evidence for adjustment. Your calendar, bank statements, and repeated reactions often reveal your real priorities more accurately than your intentions do. She shared that idea often. It was uncomfortable, but liberating. If behavior reveals priorities, then priorities can be changed through behavior. You do not need to wait until you feel different. You can begin acting differently. The feeling often follows. Maya had discovered this herself. She did not always feel financially disciplined before saving. She saved, and discipline strengthened. She did not always feel confident before setting boundaries. She set boundaries, and confidence strengthened. She did not always feel present before practicing mindfulness. She practiced, and presence strengthened. Action created evidence. Evidence created identity. Identity made future action easier. The loop could work in either direction. Negative habits could compound. So could positive ones. Maya became protective of the first small step. She knew that beginning badly was often better than waiting perfectly. Her project continued growing. She eventually brought other people into the work. A designer helped her improve the materials. A financial professional reviewed some educational content to ensure she was not overstating claims. A mental health professional helped her understand where educational guidance needed clear boundaries around clinical care. Maya welcomed the collaboration. She had once believed independence meant doing everything herself. Now she understood that independence included knowing when expertise was needed. Delegation was not weakness. Seeking advice was not weakness. Asking for help was not weakness. The fantasy of self-sufficiency had been another form of pressure. Human beings were interdependent. The question was whether the dependence was chosen and reciprocal, or coercive and destructive. Maya wanted chosen interdependence. She wanted to be able to say, I can do this myself. I could also use help. Both statements could be true. Her work began to generate income. Not extraordinary income. Enough to matter. She kept her lifestyle relatively stable. Instead of immediately increasing expenses, she directed much of the additional income toward reserves, long-term investments, education, and business development. She allowed some of it to improve her present life. The money was becoming a tool, not a trophy. She also created a rule for windfalls and unexpected income. Before spending, she would pause. Some could go toward future security, some toward meaningful goals, some toward enjoyment, some toward generosity. The exact percentages could vary according to circumstances. The principle was balance. Money could serve several purposes simultaneously. Security, growth, freedom, joy, contribution. She resisted the idea that every dollar had to be optimized for maximum future wealth. Life was not a spreadsheet, but neither was it wise to spend every resource simply because the future was uncertain. The balance mattered. Maya became increasingly interested in generosity. She had once feared that giving money away would slow her path toward independence, but she realized that generosity did not require financial irresponsibility. She could give within her means. She could help without rescuing. She could contribute without creating dependency. She could offer time, skills, attention, or money. Generosity felt different when it came from choice rather than guilt. That distinction mattered. She did not want to give because she feared being called selfish. She wanted to give because contribution was one of her values. Again, the question was alignment. She thought about all the years she had spent trying to become enough. Enough attractive. Enough successful. Enough wealthy. Enough desirable. Enough knowledgeable. Enough healed. Now she saw the hidden trap. If enough was always defined externally, the finish line moved forever. There would always be someone richer, more attractive, more accomplished, more admired, more adventurous, more educated, more connected. Comparison could manufacture permanent insufficiency. Maya wanted another definition. Enough was not a number. Enough was a relationship with sufficiency. She could still want more, but wanting more did not require declaring what she had insufficient. She could pursue growth from curiosity rather than contempt. That distinction changed ambition. I want to become better was different from I am worthless until I become better. The first created movement. The second created shame. She chose movement. As the years passed, Maya began noticing how many people around her were still trapped in the same invisible patterns she had once known. They were earning more, but feeling poorer. Dating more, but connecting less. Working harder, but living less. Consuming information, but avoiding action. Trying to appear confident while privately terrified. Buying comfort while accumulating obligations. Calling avoidance peace. Calling anxiety passion. Calling exhaustion ambition. Calling self-abandonment love. She did not judge them. She understood. She had been there. Her role was not to rescue people. It was to offer a different perspective when invited. She often said, "You don't need to hate your old life to choose a new one." That principle became central to her philosophy. Change did not require contempt for the person you used to be. The earlier Maya had been doing her best with the tools she had. She had made mistakes. She had stayed too long in situations that hurt. She had spent money to soothe emotions. She had avoided difficult conversations. She had confused approval with love. But she had also survived. She had learned. She had adapted. She had protected herself as best she could. Maya could honor that person without remaining that person. That was perhaps the deepest form of self-forgiveness. Not pretending the past was acceptable. Not denying consequences. Simply refusing to keep punishing herself after the lesson had been learned. She understood that accountability and compassion belonged together. I did something I regret. I can repair what I can. I can change the behavior. I do not need to spend the rest of my life proving that I am sorry. That was freedom. She began practicing forgiveness in relationships. Not every relationship needed reconciliation. Forgiveness did not require renewed access. Sometimes forgiveness meant releasing the expectation that the past could become different. Sometimes it meant accepting that someone might never apologize. Sometimes it meant acknowledging your own role. Sometimes it meant simply deciding that you would no longer spend your future paying emotional interest on an old debt. The metaphor made her smile. She knew about financial interest. Debt grows when it is left unresolved. So does resentment. Not always, but often. She wanted to stop paying interest on things that no longer deserved her resources. This did not mean forgetting. It meant redirecting attention. Her future needed capital. Money. Time. Attention. Love. She did not want to invest all of it in old pain. There was still room for grief. But grief was no longer the only place she lived. Maya's relationship with time became especially meaningful. When she was younger, she had treated time as unlimited. Later, she treated it as something to optimize. Now she treated it as something to inhabit. She noticed mornings. She noticed meals. She noticed conversations. She noticed the feeling of walking through rain. She noticed music. She noticed the expressions on people's faces. Presence became a form of wealth. A person could have thousands of dollars and be unable to enjoy a quiet afternoon. Another person could have little money but experience profound richness through connection and attention. Maya did not romanticize poverty. She knew financial hardship could be devastating. She knew money mattered, but she also knew that wealth without presence could become another form of scarcity. She wanted both, material resilience and emotional presence, financial freedom and lived freedom. Security and aliveness. Planning and spontaneity. The goal was integration. Years after the first notebook entry, Maya returned to the same window where she had once asked how she would live if she no longer needed to prove anything. The city looked different. Or perhaps she did. She opened the notebook to a blank page. For a long time, She did not write. Then she wrote, I thought freedom meant reaching a place where nothing could take me by surprise. Now I know freedom means becoming someone who can meet surprise without abandoning herself. She paused. Then, build wealth that creates choices. Build relationships that allow truth. Build habits that protect health. Build skills that increase independence. Build enough inner space to notice your own life. She looked at the words. They were not instructions anymore. They were reminders. She closed the notebook. The story did not end there. It could not. There would be new chapters. New losses. New beginnings. New financial decisions. New relationships. New questions about identity. New changes in the body. New seasons of work and rest. She would still become afraid. She would still make mistakes. She would still occasionally compare herself to others. She would still have days when she wanted certainty, but she had learned what to do when those days arrived. Pause. Listen. Name what is happening. Separate fact from fear. Return to values. Choose the next useful action. And if she could not choose yet, ask for help. That was enough. The final lesson was not that life becomes easy when you heal. It was that you become more capable of meeting life as it is. Healing did not remove vulnerability. It gave vulnerability a place to exist. Financial freedom did not remove uncertainty. It created margin. Healthy intimacy did not remove conflict. It created a way to navigate conflict without losing yourself. Boundaries did not prevent disappointment. They prevented disappointment from automatically becoming obedience. Self-trust did not guarantee perfect decisions. It gave you the confidence to repair imperfect ones. Maya finally understood that freedom was not a destination waiting at the end of achievement. It was practiced in ordinary moments. When you pause before saying yes, when you save before spending, when you ask for help, when you leave what harms you, when you stay where love is healthy, when you speak honestly. When you rest, when you forgive yourself, when you invest patiently. When you choose long-term value over short-term approval, when you let another person have their feelings without making those feelings your responsibility, when you let yourself have your own feelings without turning them into someone else's responsibility, when you decide that your body is worthy of care even when it does not look the way you wish, when you recognize desire without allowing desire to dictate your values, when you build a future without sacrificing the entire present. These moments are small, but lives are built from small moments. Maya no longer searched for the spectacular transformation. She trusted accumulation, a little courage, a little discipline, a little honesty, a little savings, a little rest, a little practice, a little patience. Repeated. And repeated again. That was how she had changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but steadily. She had once believed that becoming free required becoming someone else. Someone stronger. Smarter. Richer. More attractive. More successful. More confident. Now she knew that freedom had begun when she stopped treating herself as a problem that needed to be replaced. She had not needed to become another person. She had needed to become more fully present as the person she already was, while developing the skills to live more deliberately. The distinction was everything. She stood by the window for another moment, then she turned away. There was work to do, people to love, money to manage, things to learn, meals to cook. Places to visit, conversations to have, mistakes to make, and perhaps, most importantly, there was a life to live that did not need to be explained to anyone. Maya smiled. She understood now that a meaningful life was not one in which nothing went wrong. It was one in which the things that mattered most remained visible when something did. Love remained. Values remained. Choice remained. Learning remained. The possibility of beginning again remained. She did not need a guarantee. She needed courage for the next step. So she took it. Then another. And another. Not toward perfection, toward participation, not toward proving, toward living, not toward becoming invulnerable, toward becoming whole. And somewhere between one ordinary step and the next, Maya realized that she had finally stopped waiting for permission to belong to her own life.